Okay, it's another episode of Reflections, and I'm here with Zikz, the coach of CLG, Counterlogic Gaming. And let's just start in this place, okay? Is that what's really weird actually about the fact that you're the head coach of CLG now is that it's not like they had Monte and then they had Scarra and then they had Chris and then eventually they were like, right, we're going to get another person and we're going to get this guy. You were sort of there the whole time. Like even back when Monte was there, you were there in some capacity in CLG. And obviously, you've actually been the most successful coach in CLG. So technically, they could have just had you from day one if that had been in their mind. So explain this to me. How were you in CLG all these years ago? Like how did you become a part of CLG?
Okay. Okay, so it's a really, really long story. It actually starts in May 2012. So
Season 2, okay.
Pretty damn long time ago. I had noticed, I think like CLG started losing like a lot of their games at this point, and I felt really bad because at that point I was like a diehard CLG fan. I watched HotshotGG stream when it was like 20 viewers on live stream.
Okay.
So I wanted to make sure that like they improved like a lot. They played against MTWNA, and I remember they got completely ran over by AP Kog'Maw, which was really, really strong at the time.
And that was the team that was like ManCloud, Xmithie, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And they had just gotten beaten by AP Kog'Maw. And I wanted to like show them like how thinking outside the box and like thinking more strategically instead of like running like a constant systematic like way to bait Baron that everybody still does like nowadays, where it's like, okay, you put a ward in the bush, you stand still in a bush. When they walk up, you're going to kill them, right? If you're against AP Kog'Maw, one of the things I told him to do is just like simply ward the bush. Don't stand in the bush, stand to the side of the bush, like outside of it, because when they walk in, AP Kog'Maw is going to ulti the brush, and then you can just kill them when they walk up because they're baited because they just AP Kog'Maw ulti the bush. And that was like, one of the first simple things that I like taught them, and he was he like instantly knew that I was like a really, really smart person and like that I could help them a lot. So from that point on, I was helping CLG as like a remote analyst, like completely volunteer work for almost, I think, 5 months. Every single match I sent them something to like try to help them improve. So I think I was one of the like first official like team analysts.
When you say that though, that you were sending stuff in, okay, right? Here's the problem, right? It's actually that's all in 2012, and you're watching these games, you're giving them some tips, etc. But I actually know, even in 2013, even in the LCS era, I remember actually myself, I talked to Hotshot about this topic, like coaching, and he was someone who actually very early on wanted to, and funny enough, he already wanted Monte before he even got him. He wanted to have like someone who was a known figure in the community, who hopefully people would respect, who could be the coach, and they'd do all the things you'd want, prepare stuff, strategize, etc. And I remember one of the reasons why he said he couldn't do it is he said, as long as Chowster is in the team, Chowster literally has a famous line which goes like, I'm not going to be coached by, I think just to give it like true Chowster flair, I think the term was like some gold shitter or something. Like it had like some sort of classic ring to it. And so the problem is, if that's already going on like a year after the fact, how much of it do you think they took on board? Like, could you see things where they did listen, but were there things that they just ignored and never took hold,
I could see them like use some of the strategy that I sent to them, like especially Hotshot, because I was sending the messages directly to Hotshot. Like I would see him abuse like the certain things that like I sent him, and I would say that there was like a little, like a very, very little like team change when it came to those issues because of like the personalities that were on the team. But like the other person that I ended up, I guess, becoming good friends with, like while I was coaching them or like being the analyst for them, was Voyboy, because he was super, he's super young. He wants to improve, so I helped him out a lot. And when he eventually got like kicked from the team, and then Hotshot went back to top lane, I believe it was, I helped Curse a little bit because Voyboy was like more responsive, I guess, to my criticism. So I wanted to work with someone that was like really, really responsive to the criticism and like that I could help him like be the best. So Hotshot kind of like fell off for me because he wasn't responding as much, and then Voyboy became like the new person. So I helped Curse during IPL 5, and I remember like one of the most memorable things for me, like as an analyst, was it was Curse versus Curse EU, and I had to help them prepare for that match. And I just figured out that they had like the same level 1, and they did the same thing over and over and over. They always invaded topside, so I created like just some really basic like counter strategy to their level 1 that should have won them the game off of level 1, but they messed it up entirely, so that was a wash. But that was like the time that I knew that it was like analysts are going to be like super impactful. And I went back to Hotshot like after this tournament because we'll just say some unfortunate stuff happened with Curse at that time, where I was supposed to be the coach, or I was like they were going to have a meeting to see if I'd be the coach, but they never actually had that meeting apparently. So then I went to George and was like, hey, I think coaches can be really impactful in esports, and I want to like prove that to you. Like I showed him when Curse EU played Curse NA.
Yep.
And I was like, look, like this is what I told them to do, and like you can see they clearly messed it up. It's like people stood in the wrong spot out of the bush. They used summoners just like really poorly. And I was like, this is like my impact on the game directly, and they could have won the game just straight off of the level 1. So immediately after that, I got invited to the CLG house, and then this is when the famous Chowster line comes in, where essentially they just denied me outside of George, I think, and Afro and Link, because they were, new people on the team.
Sure, yeah.
They wanted a coach, because why not? But yeah, Chowster and Doublelift pretty much like instantly shut it down. It was like, okay, I don't want some. At the time, I was, I think, like diamond, like low diamond.
Okay.
They were just like, I don't want some low diamond shitter, coaching our team, especially when he's like younger than me,
Right.
So, I mean, that's really unlikely to happen. Plus, like my parents didn't want me to move out of the house at that point anyway. So, it was, yeah, that's where the Chowster part came in for sure. Right. And then after that, I lost a lot of drive, I guess, to be coach, because that was like my big opportunity that kind of just got instantly like squandered. So, but I knew that Hotshot really wanted to, from that point, have a coach. He didn't really know how to like execute on it, and eventually he retired, right?
Sure.
Which led to him being like the sub/coach
yeah. of
the team. So he was like the interim coach, I guess, until they got Monte.
Yeah.
And then that's when they got Monte.
Okay, when you had that story, right, the curse one, where, I mean, you said it like, you almost like downplayed it there. In reality, they sort of implied to you, we're going to probably get you as a coach and have a meeting or an interview or something, and then they just never got back to you. And so you went back to CLG, essentially they just wasted your time to some degree, even though you helped them out, right? Here's the thing, in life in general, that whole thing of like, success is the best revenge and all that, I kind of actually do see where it comes from. Not because it's actually good revenge, like it's not particularly good revenge because you don't really get to like wreck the person. It's just good revenge in as much as you yourself won't care as much about what happened because you succeed in later on. You'll go, whatever, I'm successful,
Yeah.
But, so I've had times in my own career, where people screwed me over or they fucked me a little bit. And then later on, I was in a position where either I had some power over them or I was just ahead of them, and you cross paths again, in that fortuitous manner. And here's the thing, it's not that like you get some sick revenge, but there is a part of you that when you see the person again, a part of you does just think like, look at me now, look at you guys now, look at me now again, I'm killing it, I'm doing really well. You probably wish you could have me now. You could have, but you can't. Is there a part of you, even with CLG perhaps, because I mean they denied you for a few years, and like I said, they had all these other coaching scenarios where, I mean, you were literally sat in their house the whole time, like, what about me? And like they were like, we got to find a coach. Where could we find a coach? Has that scarra guy just retired? Yeah, maybe we could get him. Could we just get like a guy who's like not actually involved in the, like, is there a part of you feels like, is it satisfying that you kind of, in the end, you got there and you've exceeded some of these opportunities that didn't come along earlier?
Yeah, it's super satisfying because I worked really, really hard, and I think like every single time that every single time I wanted to like reach out to George and be like, hey, I want to be head coach. Like it happened almost every single coach past Monte. Because I felt like Monte taught me a really good like lesson in like understanding what a solid like foundation for coaching is, because I didn't really have that. So I came in like almost purely like strategy, and like from Monte I learned just a solid foundation of like what coaching really is in esports. And like at that point I didn't even know that people like that teammates could hate each other. Like that didn't even occur to me like as like a thing, because all I thought about was strategy at that point.
Sure.
So he taught he taught me like how to like deal with all those people, and then like I got taught other things from like other coaches that I've dealt with. But I think I could have been head coach after Scarra, but before that, I don't think I could have been.
As in, you just wouldn't have got the chance, or you weren't equipped to. In what sense do you mean?
I felt as though I wasn't equipped to be the like head coach until Scarra, even though I had mentioned it every single time that I wanted to be the head coach, because I felt like, you know, I'm a really really driven person. Like I will work my ass off to like make sure that anything happens. Like I consider myself to have like a really hard like tryout mentality, where it's like I always feel like I'm trying out for like whatever I'm doing, so I'm just putting like everything into it. So I feel like until I met Scarra, I couldn't see like the true like the right things to do and the wrong things to do. Whereas like with Monte, I just felt like I had a really good like understanding of like the foundation, like, you know, building a schedule, what activities to do, like teamwork's important. But I didn't learn anything about the emotional side at all until Scarra. So.
Sure. I mean, I remember when Monte, because I actually, funnily enough, when he started coaching CLG was when I actually first met him in Korea, you know, so I got to see, like, from his end, I could already see how difficult it's going to be, because he was having to, like, wake up in the morning to watch, like, some scrims that were, you know, streamed through some weird, like, secret Twitch channels, and he'd have to watch a VOD back and have a team, and I was just thinking at the time, like, here's the thing. The only way I thought it could work is because if you have to remember at the time, almost no one had coaches, actually. In LCS, he was one of the first, you know? So I thought that part can work. But there was a part of me even then just thinking, like, this is obviously a hard team to coach. And if you're having to do all that remotely, it's going to be difficult. So I remember when he was the coach for those 2 seasons, 3 seasons actually, he actually would even say, like, okay, I do all that stuff on my end, but essentially Zikz is like the guy in the house. Like, he's doing stuff when I'm not there. I mean, basically, as far as I can tell, he made it sound like it was you and Kelby, because obviously Kelby's like trying to be the guy taking care of people's egos and like friendship and stuff, but the idea was you're the guy in the house, like literally when they scrim and stuff. So what was your role when Monte was actually on the team? Like how did you communicate with him? Like, did you get to insert your own ideas into practices and stuff? What was it like?
Okay, I think you're confusing me for Matt Com during that time, because I didn't end up coming into the house until week 9 of that LCS split. So like basically throughout the entire split we did really really well. We felt like there wasn't too much of a need. Like we kind of felt that the team was like deteriorating even though we were like winning all these games.
Right.
And by I think week 7 we started to lose every game, and then we went like 0-8 in our last like 8 games. Eventually I just like kind of pushed to, I told Kelby like I really want to go to the house to help the team. Eventually like he approved it, and then right when I was like landing there, they said that we're going to Korea. So I wasn't even there to like help them boot camp for week 9 Super Week, because they were going to go to Korea. So I actually landed, I said hey, and then the next day they flew to Korea. So I actually spent like absolutely no time with the team.
So you were just doing it all remotely during that era of Monte being the coach?
Yeah. The only thing I did like remotely was I would just message like all of the players maybe once a day, kind of see like where they were at with things, like emotionally, strategically, like any of that. And I just kind of wanted to be the person that was there for them to like rant to, because I knew like Monte was busy a lot of the time, and then he had like his casting, and then he had to come back and try to do like a lot of VOD review and whatnot. So I even started helping with scouting other teams. I helped with researching pick ban, helped with goal tracking and all of that, just to make like kind of Monte's life easier, and then make the team's life a lot easier too.
Were the players all receptive to it? I mean, I've heard stories that during that era of CLG, you know, some players were very coachable, like, you know, would like to, like, they would take ideas that you told them, or they would be into the practice, whereas some of the other ones either ignored it, but like in a passive way, you know, just like don't really listen, or like alt tab out and stuff. Like it sounded like it was a mixed bag. What was it like for you when you were actually like getting to one talk with these guys?
I kind of came from like the friend angle. So a lot of people like would, I guess, like air their dirty laundry to me, like what they thought were like the issues of the team. So it helped me like fix a lot of like the issues. Overall, I think I had respect like at the time, like when I first came into the house and like during the boot camp, I had a lot of respect from Zach. Ironically, I think Peter. I think I had the least respect from Link, and only like a little bit of like disrespect from like Dexter.
Okay.
Like during that time, because From my perspective, it was like I ended up like getting called back from George like a year after I had like stopped caring about like trying to coach. And he said here like do a trial with Doublelift like to see if you can be the analyst of the team. So I did a lot of individual coaching for Doublelift at that time, and then he gained a lot of respect for me because just I guess I was saying the right things, or I saw like a lot of his flaws where he thought that like he didn't have any, I guess. So I had a lot of respect for game knowledge from like those three players, especially Seraph, Peter, and Afro. But yeah, that's about it.
Okay, right. During the Monte era was where obviously one of the infamous scandals was this notion that came from Doublelift out, and it was Doublelift and Link for their own personal reasons. Basically got the word out to Reggie, who publicized it, that Monte wasn't a real coach and he was just listed as a coach because he was a big personality and he didn't really do a whole lot. And here's the thing, it wasn't really denied by CLG. Like they sort of took it back a bit, and like Kelby came out in his defense and said, but the players didn't really say a whole lot publicly. And it wasn't actually until years later, I think Doublelift even addressed the topic. So can you see why some of the players would think that was the case, that he wasn't doing anything as a coach? Was there something to that?
Yeah. No, I think honestly it was just really petty by like the players to say things like that, because I do think over time, because he was a remote coach, he just lost effectiveness. And I would say that he tried really hard to make sure that things happened. He even like offered to fly back to the team like when relegations happened. But I remember specifically like we had a meeting and we talked about do we want to keep Monte? And I didn't have much input. I personally liked Monte a lot. I remember Zach liked Monte a lot. And I think the rest of the team, no, Dexter also liked Monte a lot. So there was like 3-1 that just said that we really don't want. I think he tweeted something. I can't remember what it was, but he tweeted a lot of stuff during that time.
Talking about Monte, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
Monte tweeted something that like triggered Link and Peter to not want him to be the coach anymore. I can't remember exactly what the tweet was, but he tweeted something that was like really harsh, I believe.
Okay.
And then from that, they didn't want him to be the coach anymore. But from my perspective, I still think he tried like really, really hard. It was just his effectiveness was really limited by like the resources that he had.
Okay. So when you have this era where Monte goes out and then they get Scarra, they get Zion in the off season, and they got to come back. Like the problem with that storyline is that I think the players themselves had built that storyline in their brain that, right, the big problem we had is our coach didn't live in the house. He was remote. Like that's the big issue, you know. So this is going to be solved now because we've got Scarra. He's in the house. He's an ex-pro, and you notice players naturally in a lot of sports like to have people who were pros themselves because they think they're going to see from the same perspective, you know. And the problem is, it was going really well in the regular split, but then the end result was kind of the same as ever. You know, it was always the CLG story. You know, you get to the playoffs, everyone bombs out, and it's never the team that played in the regular split. What do you think the issues were in the Scarra era? Like, what was your role at that point in time with Scarra compared to Monte, and what were the issues in the team, do you think?
During that era, I actually feel like I did everything. Like, I did probably 16 to 18 hours of work, like, every single day. And I think the thing that we faltered with the most was Scarra wasn't a like really commanding like authority within the team. Like I had covered like scouting. I did all of the stats in game. I did a lot of the post games. And then what we had like discussed, me and Scarra, was that like he needed to be more authoritative because working with Peter especially, and not being like that kind of authoritative figure and kind of more just suggesting things rather than you being like do this, made it really, really hard to control him. And I think my biggest issue with that era was having Doublelift and Link together without having someone to put like Doublelift in his place when he didn't trust people was like the biggest issue. Because I think it was always halfway through the split we would start to falter, right? And then we would just like deteriorate over time, and like nobody really knows like what to do. And at that point I hadn't really had the knowledge, I guess, to understand it. But as I like looked back on it, and I kind of like realized that like we had certain scrims where literally like Peter would play with, or is supposed to play with Link in the team fight, right? Like,
Right.
let's say that he's like, it's Lulu Jinx or something, like a super straightforward, like, AD carry support, or AD carry mid, like, you just have to move together so you can buff each other up. He would, like, run away from Link because he didn't trust him to, like, protect him in the team fights. And just, like, small stuff like that. And eventually, like, over time, like, that kind of stuff built up, like, really heavily. And then they just kept on trusting each other less and less, and it affected their play, and I don't know, stuff would get like really flared up quickly. It was hard to deal with.
So, I mean, obviously everyone knows because of the document he released that Link was kind of like obviously quite hurt by a lot of this stuff. And by the end, I mean, if you ever read that document, the craziest part about it is, I mean, he goes like, he starts off with Doublelift and builds him up. He's like the big bad guy. But by the end, it's like he has no faith in anyone and no trust in anyone. He feels like everyone's fucked him and screwed him. And after being around him for quite a long time, here's the thing people never understood about my criticism of Link, is I think he's a really talented player. It's pretty obvious this guy could do a lot in the game and probably was quite smart in the game. But I've also noticed in his personality, like I totally could understand that like a Doublelift can be an overbearing person or stubborn, etc. But they've always felt like it with Link. There was like a little bit of like a victim complex there, you know. So like once things go wrong, then he's just going to blame stuff like that. And so he always seemed like, I've noticed people who do that, like they don't kind of accept responsibility. A lot of them do have a trend of kind of like choking or underperforming, you know, because again they just say, well, no, I didn't choke, you know. Everyone in the team did badly. Like stop blaming me, you know. It's like because they never kind of acknowledge it. I feel like that's why it's systemic. Like from the outside, as someone who was like a coach and saw the scrims and stuff, was there a choking problem for Link? Was it something else? What do you put it down to?
I don't know. It's always really hard to tell. At least like for me, because I didn't feel like, I think at that point we didn't have comms, so I couldn't really tell how the comms were going in game. All I remember during the Scarra era, I didn't feel like that playoffs he choked.
Okay.
I feel like maybe during the other times he was on the team, like he could have possibly choked. I actually don't even really remember. I just remember that was like the thing that people like said over and over.
I might be off with this, but from what I can remember, what I can recall, I think in Scarra's reflection, he actually kind of agreed with what you said about not being very authoritative as a figure. And I think he even might have said something along the lines of like, in that playoffs, he essentially let the players do some of the pick ban. Like I think he let Link scout the whole pick ban for like the season. And then at the end, Link at the last second was like, I don't want to do it in the playoffs. Some crazy story like that. Do you remember any problems like that?
Yeah. For sure. We, like, basically all I would do is I would do the scouting. So I would make sure that we have like decent bans, I guess, and like a decent priority list to go into every single draft with. And then I remember we kind of like, this is around the time that coaches started standing on stage with the players. So like it wasn't necessarily 100% sure if, you know, Scarra was going to do the draft or Link was going to do the draft, because Link had already been doing the draft. So Scarra wanted to try doing the draft alone after I think like week 5, because both of them were doing the draft, and eventually we had some really funky drafts where like Scarra was like visioning one thing and then Link's visioning another thing, and they kind of just wanted to go with either one of their directions because they felt like either one would have been good, you know, but they kind of bet in the middle and then it was bad, right? So we ended up giving the reins to Scarra for I think like the last weeks of the LCS, but we didn't find any success. And then Link was just like, I will step up and do it. And then I believe we passed it over to Link like for that time. But all I'd been doing the whole time was just being like, all right, here's the bans. Here's, you know, what the priority list is for the enemy team. This is what we should prioritize based on what they play. And then I kind of just, I know it's pretty bad to say, but I kind of just hoped that they would make the right decisions because I didn't want to like bias them. But I didn't want to make them, you know, think the way that I was thinking. Okay. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that was like the main issue. It's just like they just kept on butting heads on a lot of like picks, so they didn't ever want to meet in the middle like anymore. So. Okay.
When I first talked to Hotshot about like this coaching stuff and things, just in his team, like I'm referencing, this is like the early LCS days, like sort of early 2013, and I remember back then he actually told me something along the lines of like I basically said to him, you know, if I was a coach, one thing I would do is I would have like a really strict approach to it where it's like, as harsh as this might sound, like, you know, if you've got a star player, yeah, you work with him, you build the game around him, you give him responsibility. Yeah. But the idea is, if at that point, you know, he's still not responsive and he's actually like sabotaging the team in any way, then it might sound harsh, but you got to cut it off. I think, you know, like you got to go right. It's like they do it in sports. You know, you got to kind of like blow it up and build up from the beginning again. Like find a new star player, build around this guy. Yeah. And so it might be painful, but the notion is rather than have, I mean, ironic is what basically CLG did. Rather than have like, you know, 4 or 5 splits where you never quite make it, you're willing to sort of say, listen, I'll have one bad split that maybe nothing happens so that I can rebuild the whole thing, you know. And the problem was, Hotshot basically said to me, yeah, but that's my problem. My main star player is the guy that is we have the most problems, which was Doublelift, obviously, he was referring to at the time. So throughout all the eras, I've noticed one of the interesting things about Doublelift is, like, if there were other players who did choke or underperformed in the playoffs, in general, it seemed like that was one of the few things that Doublelift didn't seem to do. Like, he in general seemed to be pretty stable as a player. But the storyline, as we found out in the Link case, is that a lot of the other players essentially all like attribute some of their problems to Doublelift. Like, you know, he just wouldn't listen to me, or I mean, they don't say like outright bullied him because it's obviously not that bad, but like he was a bit overbearing, you know, or he had to play the game his way, or if he lost trust in people, kind of he just reverted back to his style of play, you know, whatever the situation may be. So as someone who was around him the whole time and saw him with all the different coaches, what were the challenges to having Doublelift in a team, do you think? I mean, what was like the arc of things that you had to overcome, or what was his issue basically? He's obviously again a very good player, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think, like, to just start with the good, I think that Peter was really, really consistent. Like, he didn't really have an off day where he just wasn't communicating. He always, like, I could feel that drive from him to want to win, but he just didn't know how to do it. So the only way that he knew how was to be super assertive, because that's what he had learned from, you know, like Chowster and, you know, that era of CLG, was to be like, okay, you fucked this up, I'm going to point it out. And then he didn't really understand like how to do it tactfully, I guess.
Okay.
So he would always just be like, instead of saying, you know, like, Zion, I think you need to like work on your rumble, like flat out, like out in the open to everyone, he just says, well, Zion's rumble is shit. You know, like, say it like that instead of, you know, saying it in a more tactful way.
Yeah.
Which kind of, I guess, like, hurt more of the, like, emotional players' feelings. So, like, Seraph was really emotional. Link was really emotional. I think Dexter wasn't really emotional. He was more, like, spiteful whenever, like, Peter did that.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think as, like, we built into, I think it was spring 2015, we didn't have as many, like, emotional players on the team. So it wasn't too big of an issue then. But I would say that, and kind of like airing his dirty laundry to other people, like instead of like going straight to them with like things that they could, you know, work on, improve, etc. He always did it in a really roundabout manner. So he wouldn't go up to me and be like, you know, I think the way that you look at the game could be better if you do this. Instead, he would be like, you know, this guy's shit. He doesn't work that hard. Like, you know, he says like those kinds of things.
Okay.
So I think like that was mostly his issue, and he would never really be easy on people, and he would lose a lot of trust if you mess up.
So one of the interesting things about the like charting the Doublelift story in CLG is that it feels like if you look at the timeline, obviously putting Aphromoo back with him ended up not just being good because Aphromoo became a very good support, but it seems like he was one of the few people that he latched onto where they got like a decent relationship, you know what I mean? If you think about like Season 4 going to Season 5, I mean, the bot lane was very solid. That part seemed like it was working in the team, you know, and it was no wonder the team was so good in that respect. But I remember that comment that Aphromoo made after Doublelift left the team. Well, it was kicked, but you know, same thing, you know, like traded, whatever, after Season 5, where he made that comment along the lines of like, before I tried to be like Peter's friend, you know, and be like the confidant guy. I'll be the guy where it's like, you know, at least I'm on your side, you know, and to win him over that way. But then the idea was in the Chris era, Aphromoo became kind of the captain, you know, so now he was like, well, I can't just be your mate anymore. I have to kind of focus on these other guys. And if you think about it logically, that kind of makes sense in terms of the rest of the team, because if the rest of the team was getting sabotaged to some degree by Doublelift, whether intentionally or not, you know, maybe just part of his frustrations, eventually building up the confidence of other people and kind of giving them someone to follow that isn't just the voice that's assertive but negative, you know. You can see why that would help, but Is that also part of the problem, like shifting away from Aphromoo? You think why there was the split and why eventually why Doublelift had to go? Could it have worked out?
I don't know. Like, there was always a really like, I think on the outside the relationship looked a lot better. Like the Aphro and Doublelift relationship looked so much better, like from the outside. But like when you're actually like on the inside and like you kind of like see their like relations in person, I didn't really feel that.
So it was just because they got along on stream and that sort of thing, you know?
Yeah, like, you know, they'd be loud together on stream, they'd have a lot of fun, and like that was cool. I enjoyed like watching them do that, but like kind of when the cameras are off, they didn't share like that much time together. Okay. I saw those two as like almost the exact opposite, like on the sides of the spectrum. Like Zach at one point, especially like during like the 2015 era, was like pretty passive person. And then like he eventually like developed into like being the team captain like halfway through the split. And then Doublelift was just super assertive, like always on. So actually like during scrims they didn't talk too much about like their personal like 2v2 strategy or anything like that, because they didn't just like talk to each other at all. Zach would solo queue, Doublelift would solo queue. They just kind of went their own ways, and then like the only time that they really like played together was like if one of them was like feeling really good after like a solid day of scrims, and then they were just like, do you want to duo? Sure, dude. And then so it was like almost like case by case that they were like pretty good friends.
Okay.
So I wouldn't even say it was like anything in particular that like triggered it. I think maybe there could have been a honeymoon phase when like Aphro first joined the team with Peter, but I'm not really sure. Like when I came in, it was just that the entire time. It was like they were pretty good friends, but it wasn't like anything special.
Wasn't it implied that Doublelift might have been traded or kicked like before that summer split that you guys won, the season 5 one? Wasn't there some implication or something like that? Like the team was thinking about it at least, and they decided not to for that split.
Yeah. I think around that time we had gotten a message from Forgiven.
Could well be, because if you think about it, that's after SK Gaming. I think that's what happened. I think he told me something like, Forgiven, by the way, I think told me something along the lines of that he'd had contact with a couple of NA teams, one of them CLG, obviously, and that, from what I remember, the reason why Forgiven didn't like it is, like, you have to understand what his personality is like. He was like, they wanted me to do a tryout. And I was like, just do the tryout and be good then. He's like, you don't understand. A tryout. I'm the MVP. I was, all right, mate. Like, so, you know, a lot of these egos have their own shit going on. You know, like, it's okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
What we were told was like, was that he wasn't an ego, which is kind of
in his own way. He's different from Doublelift, put it that way. He's got his own ego, though, sure.
Yeah. That's what we were told, like, from the SK people, I think, at the time. I think it was Interflame was, like, the manager then. During that time, like, during that off-season after Scarra, I think the entire, like, team and organization met up and did, like, this big, like, I guess I can call it a round table, I guess, where everybody just talked about, like, what they fucked up in the season and, like, what they're going to do to fix it. And I just remember, like, Peters was like brutally honest to the point where he was just like, yes, I was a shitty teammate. And, you know, he kind of like went in on that, and then he was just like when everybody was talking about like what they could improve on, I remember he said that he said that he was going to try to improve on it, whereas everyone said that like they were going to improve on it, you know? And he was just like, I will try, but I'm not sure if it'll happen, like that kind of like feeling, I guess. So like right after that meeting, I remember like we went into George's like room and was talking about how we're not sure like what changes we'd want to make during the split. And I think at that time like Hotshot was really, really adverse to change. So I think after that meeting, he went back to the room and was just like, I don't want to change the roster. And I was just like, well, I don't think we're going to succeed if we don't change the roster. And then I think eventually Link just said that he was going to quit because he didn't want to like put up with that anymore. Like he didn't want to put up like with a whole season of the exact same thing where it's like, okay, they're going to try really hard Peter's probably going to lose trust in him, or already has lost trust in him, because that dynamic's already like there.
Yeah.
Like that already exists within the team. So it was just, I don't know. Eventually we just said, okay, I think that we could change out Peter for a rookie, and that could be like a really good like thing to look for. And then he brought up the idea of like Forgiven, because he had apparently gotten a message from him. So we were thinking about it at the time, but I think, like I said, George didn't really want to change it. And then the only reason that we changed mid lane was because Link wanted to quit, but we were going to keep the same roster for that split. Yeah.
So this was the split where Chris came in, and obviously, I mean, one of the best splits in CLG history, won the split, went to Worlds. It's all great stuff. What did he bring as a coach? Like, what was your role with him? What was he bringing that was different from the other people?
So Chris, what his objective was to like come into the team, keep people motivated, put them in the right mindset, and I guess like discipline them. So he was more like the authoritative type. Okay. Like I think the one thing that he did pretty well was just confrontation. So just making sure, like, you know, he put people in their place when they like truly fucked up. And you know, that most of that was like out of game. So if people, you know, were screaming retard, if people were saying the F word, is like he instantly just called it out and was just like, no, like you cannot say that shit. You're going to be doing interviews, and if you say any of those in an interview, it's like you're going to be fined and like all this other stuff. But I think outside of that, maybe like he did some solid like team building. Like he was the person that like the entire team like didn't really like, I guess. So like everybody came together. Like
so a lot of the things you're describing at the moment are all things that for a coach, sure, these are, I mean, funnily enough, these are aspects of a coach that people you're describing before, Scarra, etc., didn't really have. You know, they didn't have the authority figure aspect, they didn't have the team building aspect. They kind of just expected other players to take care of themselves, and then think it's just like we got to have the basics of the game, and then we win the game because we have good players. So was he mainly just doing out of the game stuff? Were you essentially coaching the in-game stuff? What was the role there like?
Yeah, he was completely doing out of game, and I was completely doing in-game at the time. And yeah, I mean, that's about it. He did everything out of game. He like took them for runs in the morning, tried to instill in them like the team mindset, like a more like killer mindset too, where it's like, okay, it's game day, like you don't talk to the other teams, stuff like that.
How does CLG as a team, with almost the same roster, I mean, it was basically just Pobelter instead of Link, and funnily enough, like not that dissimilar players, you know, that was probably the reason also why people didn't expect you guys to win. How does the team do its turnaround then? What changes to make CLG into a champion, do you think?
I think, honestly, like, having Pobelter helped a lot, and I think that during that split, me and Zach especially, like, we finally clicked, like, as, like, two people. At the time, I wasn't, like, sure, like, how the balance should be between, like, you know, being a coach and, like, letting him do his, like, strategy thing. Plus, when we got rid of Link, like, Link was also a big part of, like, our strategy. So Link and Aphro would butt heads a lot about, like, what they wanted to do with, like, the strategic direction. Okay. And when I eventually became, like, the strategic coach, I felt like I had a lot more responsibility to, I guess, push the game in the direction that I wanted to push it. So me and Zach worked a lot together. Like, me mostly about, like, out of game. Or not out of game, like, preparation for the game. So it could be, like, early game, draft, win conditions, like, all of that. It's kind of, like, what I covered. And then, like, Zach would cover what mistakes were made in the game and, like, how we could improve. And I think once we, like, kind of figured out that system between, like, the two of us, like, it was really, really easy for us to improve, like, constantly. I think that was, like, probably the contributing factor, along with the fact that, you know, Peter didn't really have anyone that could be negatively affected by, like, the things that he said. Because at the time, Darshan was becoming, like, a really, really strong-willed person. Like, I think Peter challenged Darshan a lot, and Darshan has, like, one of the best mindsets of any player I've had, where it's like, he will look at someone that's, you know, giving, like, criticism, even if it's, like, done poorly, harshly, whatever, and he'll take that in, and take it as like positive feedback, like things that he can work on, and he instantly turns that into goals. So Pole Vaulter was a good friend of Peter's, so it wasn't like a big issue, and like he trusted Peter a lot. Peter trusted him a lot. So I think like that split, we just had just like a good level of trust between everyone, and everybody was really driven to succeed.
Okay. After all, I mean, since you were there from the early days of CLG and you saw the storyline like I talked about before, where it doesn't matter how good it looks in the split, as soon as it comes to playoffs, there's that like sick feeling in your stomach, like, oh shit, how's it going to go wrong now? Like probably the worst one from my memory was that one where it was actually Monte's first split. It was the summer one where you guys had actually beaten TSM in all 4 games, and then you played them in the first round, and then everything went to shit, and they still beat you 2-0 anyway. And it's like that was like the chance to fail. Sona ult, if everyone remembers that one way, like span around and did it in a wall. But,
yeah.
So, okay, if this happened all those times, then when you get to the final, I think this is the one in Madison Square Garden, right? Was the final?
Yeah, it is.
So when you get to the final and you're facing, it has to be TSM, right, for the story. The story's not as good if it's not like the old enemy, you know. They're the ones who always win when they're in the finals. It seems like, you know, like they've had all the success. It must have been very satisfying to have not just like beat them, but if you remember the storyline of how you beat them was you just found this Yasuo pick that just wrecked them in terms of the pick ban and controlled the series, right? It must have been for personally like very satisfying, right?
Yeah, I actually have a funny story about that. This is gonna sound really silly, but when I was prepping for them, like to figure out, I guess, like how I wanted to draft against TSM that series, one of the things I knew was like I knew that Darius had a really, really limited champ pool, so we ended up banning like all of his champs, and we were like, I wonder if we could bait them to pick Gnar so that we could go Yasuo, because Darshan had practiced that matchup probably like 1,000 times in solo queue and scrims, whatever. And what we did in game was I was like, okay, in draft we're gonna hover Gnar and then look like we're talking about it like really intensely. So I made the entire team like talk about the Gnar. Like I actually, when I got on stage, I almost forgot about the Gnar thing, and then Darshan brought it back up.
Okay.
But we
this makes them think that you're gonna take it next rotation or something.
Exactly. So they look over and they're like, okay. They're talking about Gnar. They're hovering Gnar. So what they did was they eventually wanted to blind pick Gnar because they felt like that was the best blind pick since we had banned all the top laners. Okay. And then from that we stole Yasuo, which was Bjergsen's most practice pick during that time. So they built like this huge Yasuo comp. We built a Yasuo comp, but we ended up with the Yasuo top in a good matchup. So after that, they seemed like really, really tilted. They didn't really know what to do. So they just started trying to like play whatever they could, and then we just ran them over. So it was really funny that like off of the one like Gnar hover, I guess, they got baited into a game losing like situation.
Okay, because the interesting part about that is, as an outsider, it looked like the order was because he just got beat up by the Yasuo that they made Bjergsen pick it to just take it away. But actually they'd originally probably planned to use it anyway, right, in their comp. It's just they didn't get to run it till then.
Yeah, if you look at what the comps they were like running, they had Kog'Maw, which is like magic damage, sets up for the AD mid. They were playing tank tops that were like AP, so like they would have like a solid damage spread for a mid laner that would be AD. So like they just kept on setting up for that, but then it didn't even matter by the point that like we gave it to them because we had like a solid pick into it, which was Victor. So yeah.
Okay, so here's the thing, right? When you've described like some of the problems that still existed in the team, like, you know, maybe a little bit of disharmony with the coaches and stuff, and like, for example, it's not like, even though you're winning, I know everyone wanted in their mind to be like, wow, Doublelift's turned it all around, now he's the best teammate ever. I'm sure there was still some friction like you're describing. So, you know, when you won that split, and then everyone was like so emotional, you know, and they were doing all those interviews. Yeah, man, you know what? I actually think we're like first time in my life, we're like a team. And they're saying all these like, it's like great, it's like Oprah stuff, you know. They're saying all the great stuff. It sounds really heartwarming, you know. Was that just like were they kind of just drunk on the emotion of the moment? Did people actually really believe like, wow, we came together, you know, the little league, it's like the fucking Mighty Ducks or something, the movie's happening, and now we're going to go to Worlds and we're going to win it? Would people really believe in that? Was some of that for the camera?
I think, okay, so the interesting thing was, and I'm going to bring this back to Scarra. Scarra said to me one day, and I'll probably remember this like forever. He says to me, Peter won't be a successful player unless he wins every single game. And that sounds dumb, like, but at the same point, it's like, at the time, he was like the type of person that if we had lost games, he would lose trust quickly.
Yeah.
But he didn't really have that opportunity like during that split. We had lost like maybe like I think it was like 4 or 5 games like during the middle of the split, but we like picked it back up because he trusted like his teammates at the time. It wasn't like Link on the roster.
Yeah.
It wasn't like other random people. It was like people that he really liked, and so he didn't really have like that. I guess like those trust issues that he normally had.
You're making it sound like he just didn't have the opportunity to sabotage the team.
Well, I mean that's part of it, but he also like during that time grew like a lot as a person to like, I guess overall trust like more people and like trust people more with like everything. He like gave up like certain shot calling duties to other people. People were contributing more, so he like felt more comfortable, I guess. And yeah, I feel like it's really hard to not feel like a team when you're winning every game. But I guess I felt like in game as a team we were really, really strong, but out of game it still felt like we were maybe not like a family. It was just more like, you know, a group of 5 dudes that like play the game really well.
Okay.
And like we helped each other really well in game. So I think in game we were a really solid team.
So another interesting storyline, again, you'll notice the trend here, right, is because the team's winning, not only internally do people think everything's going good, but externally the storyline gets painted like, you know, oh, everyone's a saint at that point in time and everything's wonderful and it's all great. Because people want to believe that's why you win. They don't realise, like as you're describing here, I've always thought it's the other way. I've always thought you love your teammates more when you are winning. Like, that's why you love this guy, because it's all working, you know. So one of the other storylines that came along was this was one of the early projects that Weldon Green worked with, the sports psychology trainer. And because people knew about this, if you think about the storyline again, so now Doublelift somehow has won LCS, you know, the guy everyone made fun of, like his trophy case is empty, because he's now won LCS, and now everyone's saying these nice things like Darshan, like, oh, feel like a team now finally, you know, we're all united and stuff. People gave a lot of credit to Weldon for this and were like, right, he must have worked with Doublelift really well and helped with his mentality and stuff. But I remember the storyline was after LCS when he went to Worlds, like he didn't go to Worlds with you, right? He just only helped during the split. What kind of role did he play within the team? Like, was there any key breakthroughs you had? What was it like in that sense?
I think, like, to be completely honest, going back to the giving Chris 5%, right? I think giving Weldon would definitely take more of the share than Chris during that split, because when he came in, it was probably the most effective like few weeks that we had as a team, because he had a solid understanding, I guess, of like what Chris should be doing. So at the time, like we were even considering like, holy shit, maybe we should just pick up Weldon as the head coach, because like the things that Chris were doing were like not really that, I guess, impactful at the time. But Weldon came in, he taught us like just so many basic things, like things you'd probably laugh about if you thought like if you found out we weren't doing, like having a morning routine, understanding like what people's success triggers are. Like people play better if they take a shower in the morning, they feel like they, you know, prepared for the day, like that kind of stuff.
Okay.
Just like a lot of like basics and like fundamentals, I guess. He like helped us improve on a lot, especially outside of game. And then even in game, he made people more cohesive overall. So I would actually give him like a good amount of like the share, because I think he did come in after we had like the hard week, or like the hard few weeks where we like started losing, and he kind of brought it back. I thought he was like a really big advantage that CLG had, because no other team like had that like had that type of person. But I would say like as time went on, I think because it was like new for him, new for us too, like his effectiveness overall went down, because I think the most important thing that he just touched on was like the fundamentals, and when he tried to like dive really hard into one subject, a lot of it was like less impactful overall.
Okay. So yeah?
You can just go.
Okay. When you went to Worlds, if you remember, he put out that video Which, I mean, what's funny is a lot of his videos at the time before he became the TSM coach, he didn't get like loads of views, you know, he didn't used to get like thousands or whatever. So I think I'm one of the only people who watched most of them, you know. And I remember this one was particularly infamous because it was the one where he said, like, CLG will win Worlds. And then it's like, I mean, that enough, you can stop there. Like, that's the headline right there. You've got a marquee, that's like a fucking headline. But he doesn't even stop there. He goes like, you know, and you know what else? Like, Korea's going to like drop off because the West's got sports psychology training. Like, he's really putting it out there, right? He's not holding back on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you hear about that? Did you know that he'd actually told the world you were going to win Worlds? What do you think of this?
Yeah, I do remember him saying that. And I do remember him being like really, really confident in us to succeed because we had... he made the video after we had already just like completely smashed
first week, was it? Oh, right. It's just after the final, right?
Yeah, so it was right after the final, and like it was... We were like unbelievably confident. But I think going into Worlds... we set ourselves up in probably the worst possible situation to succeed. Like we went to the boot camp. Xmithie ended up not having his like visa ready, so we ended up scrimming with like Huhi as our jungle for I think 3 weeks, and then Jake started scrimming for like 1 week while we were at the boot camp. So we had the 1 week of practice, along with the fact that we didn't bring Weldon, who I thought was more effective overall than Chris. And then Chris also didn't want to utilize Weldon anymore, as he thought that he could like fulfill Weldon's like duties, but that ended up not being true. So we just had like a really rough boot camp, I guess. Like a lot of really unfortunate things happened, so there was like no way that we were going to win the Worlds with like those circumstances. So I think maybe at the time everybody was just like steaming with confidence, like how hard we smashed TSM, who was supposed to be, you know, like some super solid roster, and like we were going essentially like Super Saiyan that split. So I think he said it like because he was just as confident as us, I guess. I don't know.
Okay. So at Worlds, people will forget you had a very winnable group. I mean, sure, we know Cool Tigers is amazing now, and, you know, they end up going to the finals, etc. But, I mean, this was a group where, as a number one seed, this is pretty good. Like, you should have a good chance to get out, like, second at worst, you know, maybe even challenge Cool, obviously. And the first week went well. You went 2-1. What unraveled? What was there anything specifically? I mean, you're talking about some of the outer games things. Were there things in game that went really wrong?
We first week when we had lost to Rocks, our draft was like completely messed up because when we had scouted the...
This was the game where they did...
This is actually going to sound hilarious.
Was this the game where they did, like, they floated the Kennen and picked it as support?
Exactly.
Okay, right.
Exactly. So we had looked at Gorilla's account.
Yeah.
Gorilla had played probably like hundreds of games of Kennen support, like Kalista Kennen. So we were like, okay.
Okay.
We were like, that's 100% support, because we looked at Smeb's account, right, on the Korean ladder, and he had 1 game of Kennen the entire year, and he went 0-8.
Okay, this sounds like you're leading up to a classic pick ban story here.
So I was like, okay, guys, we can take the risk, not ban the Kennen, and we can just play Blitzcrank into it, because like Blitzcrank can like punish it really hard in lane, even though it kind of sounds dumb, you know. And it's like, okay, you're going to pull a Kennen into your team. But, like, in reality, it's not like the Kennen's going to have Zhonya's. You can one-shot him.
Okay.
You're just going to, like, literally take him out of the fight the entire time. So, we pick Kennen, or we pick Blitzcrank, after they show Kennen. And then we were like, okay, guys, we got this. And then they swapped to Morgana, and we were like, wait, what's going on? What's going on? And then, like, it just, like, our brains exploded because we had taken, like, the risk of the century and assumed that a top laner couldn't play a champion. I think that was like a really defining moment for like me understanding pick ban a bit more, is like you can't really expect people to not take an option that is like clearly better for them, even if they haven't practiced the champion.
You don't think it's possible that like Smeb's some like next level ninja and he had like a second account where he used to practice Kennen secretly and he baited you in?
We had knowledge of like all of his accounts.
Okay.
Because we had, I think at that point we had like Korean contacts that like were
You're just
like,
biased.
essentially like
okay.
Yeah, we had our spies in there. With the like, they had like an account list of like all of the accounts.
Sure, yeah.
And yeah, we just didn't see any Kennen, so we didn't think about it. So that was like first week, and then second week after that, all I remember is it was, I think, the first game. We were standing backstage, and like this is something that even Chris like brought up like as one of his like biggest faults, I guess, like while coaching, like CLG. He like completely took Doublelift like out of his usual like pre-game routine. Like Doublelift is usually a person that like gets pretty nervous. Like it doesn't really appear that way, but he gets really nervous before games. So he's like joking, I guess. He jokes around, like just talks with his friends and just like I guess essentially like memes like the entire time.
Do you think when he was trying to do a speech like that, like was there any element of like this is actually a problem I've noticed, unfortunately, with like things like esports? Obviously, a lot of the people who are the coaches haven't really done much coaching in their careers, you know. So it's not like they're the 30-year basketball coach who kind of knows when to do the speech, you know. And unfortunately, I mean, the best way to say it is a lot of people who get into coaching, part of the appeal is one day you want to have your like, you know, any given Sunday speech where you give that like sick speech to the player or the team and it turns everything around, or it gets this guy into a different mood or something. Was there any component of that to like his leadership style? Was he trying to do you think he had a plan as to what you thought he was doing with these sorts of authoritarian approaches?
No. The only time where I ever felt like he was impactful via like something like a speech was there's like a Razor video that showed him giving a speech like to kind of get people motivated again during the Korean boot camp. Okay. I think that was like the only time that he had like a really effective speech, even though it seemed kind of out of place, but it still was like effective overall. Like it motivated players to like push themselves to do better and all of that. But like that time in particular, it was just really out of line. And I think more so he thought that his intention was right, like to try to get people in like that killer mindset again, instead of like having them joke around like before a match and like all that. Like he just sees himself in a killer mindset, and then he looks at someone that's not in it and says, well, that's clearly wrong, right? So he just made a bad judgment call that day. Like I can't really fault him for that, because I feel like at least during Worlds he was like trying like his best, but he just made, you know, the wrong decision. So like that kind of stuff happens.
From seeing him and being around when he was the coach of that style, like you don't seem like a guy who's particularly authoritarian, you know. Like, did that? Was there anything you took from that? Like, how have you balanced that out yourself as a coach? Like, when to like tell people what to do, when to reprimand people, and when to kind of just let them, you know, I give them a bit of the reins, you know.
Okay. I learned a lot of like, I guess like confrontation from Chris. That was like the one thing I would say I definitely learned from him. So overall, like I guess my style as a coach is more like the people's coach, where it's more so I work with the players and like kind of lead them in the right direction, and like work harder than them, lead by example, like that kind of stuff. So as far as like reprimanding them and stuff, I just do it if I see them doing something that's like clearly wrong. So if effort's low, then, you know, I point it out, make sure that, you know, they turn it up. Like the things I care about the most are definitely like effort, efficiency, and like participation. As long as they're like putting everything into it, I don't really have a problem if they make, you know, the wrong decisions, right? People are going to make mistakes, and I can work on them to like help them fix mistakes, but I can't help someone that doesn't want to, you know, push themselves and doesn't want to help themselves. So
okay. So one thing, knowing how strict some of the Korean coaches are, that I've always thought would be problematic as the West introduced more and more coaching and like a real structure, is like you can't transport some of that stuff over. Like I don't think people, especially Western teenagers, could handle like super strict all the time. You know, like how do you balance it out? Like it in your teams, I've noticed there's a trend where sometimes in the middle of the split, you know, there can be some games that don't go so well, or towards the end of the split, maybe there's, you know, as long as like eventually it gets back on course, it seems like that's okay. Are you someone where, like, what do you do in some of the harder times? Because obviously not every week everyone can give 100% effort, right? Or be totally engaged or whatever.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
What's your kind of philosophy on that? Because I mean, it's a long split, right?
Yeah. For me, I just try to challenge them, I guess, as much as possible to like make sure that they're constantly improving. So like even if I know that, you know, they can't give 100%, I still push them to give 100%. And like I just constantly, like, I guess, create challenges for them to seed.
So after season 5 Worlds, and the way it ended obviously was like terrible for everyone, because even though you made Worlds, like no one wants to go out in that way. You know, it's one thing to lose by like a game, but like that was, I mean, even losing to Pain at the end was like the ultimate kind of indignity. You know, like what a terrible end to the Worlds.
Yeah.
Was it always going to be the case that like, okay, I mean, this Doublelift experiment's over, like it has to end here? Like, could there have been a world in which season 6 starts and it's just the same exact team?
Yes, I would say that there could have been that world for sure, but like if George had like pushed harder to keep him, because I felt like he sold himself like really well, and he had improved like actually a ton. Like I felt like he definitely changed as a person, and like overall like right now especially I would say that he is like so much better. He's just light years better than he was like in like 2014 CLG. So I did feel like there was a chance that he would still be on the roster, but eventually, myself and Zach really pushed for the change because we wanted to look higher, I guess, than that, because we always felt limited, I guess, by like having him there, and a lot of people had like really bad like histories with him, like especially George. Like George, every single time he talked to Peter, he would like get really stressed out and like go in his room and just like chill, so that he didn't have to like deal with it. And like other people would deal with Peter entirely. Like when we brought in Devin, like our new CEO, like he dealt with like almost everything Peter because George didn't want to like put up with it. But once again, like I said, George is like a person that's pretty adverse to change, so it was scary for him, I guess, to like let go of what we consider as like our star player and like our biggest brand on the team and like all of that. So eventually, when I became head coach, I wanted to rebuild with 2 rookies and like start over, because I thought that the most important thing I learned from all of the other splits was that performance on stage matters for sure, but I think the most important thing is improving the process, and then that's what gets you the higher result, right? So I wanted to have players that were always receptive to learning. Wanted to have players that are always, willing to give criticism to others. So we kind of created that environment by bringing in 2 more rookies in place of where we felt there were issues with being criticized. Like, I remember during the bootcamp, Pobelter said that he didn't really like being criticized, like at least maybe the way I was doing it or something. Like there was some issue there with like being directly criticized and confronted. Okay. So we had instead chose to pick up the 2 rookies because we felt like they were going to be really good for our process overall. And I think it showed for sure that we learned faster than most teams. We pushed ourselves hard. Like everybody was really driven to prove everyone wrong that split.
Okay, so were you not worried about losing your star player, having to put a rookie in there? I mean, here's the thing, okay, one of the problems with being a coach is it actually doesn't matter how good a coach someone is. Sometimes you just have the wrong team for you, or maybe it's just the wrong time. I mean, we've seen examples of where a team kind of matures, but that coach is gone already because the coach basically gets judged on the results. So I mean, this puts more pressure when you're coming in to be the head coach, right? If you've got rookies with you as well, and the established stars gone, was it not worrying for you? Were you not concerned?
Well, sorry, can you repeat the question?
Were you not concerned about not having Doublelift and having to bring in rookies in your first season as a coach?
No, I wasn't concerned. I was actually, it was my idea entirely to do it. One thing I will say though is that like I do think I could have worked with Peter because I knew that I had his trust like as like a tactician, I guess, to like lead them in the right direction. But I do think that I would have needed someone like Weldon or a Chris type figure in case things go poorly. Like I don't think I could have like one-man armied that situation. But when Peter was gone, it felt a lot easier because I just had to teach people game mechanics and like how to best play the game, and then teach people how to have like the best possible process. So I was really really confident that we could succeed because I had seen both of those players play previously. Because Stixxay was on the CLG Black team,
Sure.
and he had subbed for Peter in scrims 1 week, and we just completely demolished scrims like that entire week. And like he was dodging like I had never seen like any player dodge before. Like he played Callista, and he would just like never get hit by a skill shot in team fights. He would always get like so much more damage off in team fights, and that was kind of the moment like when he subbed out for when Doublelift hurt his pinky, that I was like, damn, this guy's actually like really good. And that went into our like decision when we did end up picking him up. And then Huhi, we had seen him play before. He was really really strong Azir player, as funny as that sounds, and we thought his communication was like beyond anything we had like seen before from a mid laner, because we had Link, who was like often pretty quiet, and then we had Pobelter, who was also often pretty quiet and didn't want to set up like too many plays. But we felt like Huhi was a person that would set up plays and like try to carry the game, I guess, like really hard.
Okay. So when we set up the storyline of you being with CLG, etc., I mean, essentially, you probably thought in the early days, like, okay, now I'm going to get like some input in the team, and then you kind of like blocked a little bit. You know, some players listen, some players don't. Then later on, you know, I'm sure there must have been times when you thought like, oh, maybe now I'll get a chance to be a coach, but you don't. You kind of like pushed back again. And I even thought, I remember on this last one here, yeah, they'll try and get another high profile coach. You know, it seemed like the way everyone was going in the game, you know. So was there ever a part of you thought like you're never going to get your shot? Like you're always going to kind of be thought of as like, yeah, you can be the in-game analyst or whatever, but you can't be the coach.
I think after summer 2015, that's when I knew that I was going to be the head coach after that, because I had actually dealt with, like during the Scarra era, I felt like I did everything as much as an analyst could do, as much as like an assistant coach can do. And then during the next era, I felt like I had to even push myself harder. And then I had external pressure too. So after that split, I knew like almost for sure that I was going to be the coach. But during the Scarra era, especially when they were like, okay, we're going to have to look for another coach again, that's when I really felt like that weight that I was like potentially never going to be like the head coach of the team. But yeah, after 2015, I knew for sure, like just from meetings that I had, conversations I had had with like other people around the house, like every single player pushed for me to be the head coach. And yeah, at that point, I just knew for sure that I was going to be the head coach.
Right, since you won LCS in your rookie season as a head coach, that on the surface looks really crazy, right? Especially with like Doublelift leaving a lot of it. But here's the thing. If this was a movie, the storyline would be perfect, right? Because the storyline is like it's too good for the movie, right? So let me just set up the basic storyline. So the storyline would be like, you know, you were the guy who came in, and then, you know, obviously at the beginning of the movie, Chosta would be like, I'm never having that gold shit or whatever, the diamond shit. Just tell me what to do. That's like a sick like opening chapter, you know, because then that sets the tone that like it's going to be real hard struggle in this movie, you know. And then every time like you're doing progressively more and more in the team, and you're seeing all these big names come and go. You know, you've got Monte, you've got Scarra, and then Chris. Okay, he wasn't a big name, but okay, he came in with a lot of fanfare because it was going to be this real coach that had come in and discipline people and stuff. And they're having the different varied successes, and then eventually you get your own shot. Now in the movie, the reason why it would be a really satisfying like story arc is it would be some sort of feel-good story where you'd like realize yourself, like, you know what? Actually, I wasn't ready to be a coach myself. Like I had to like learn something from each of these like different figures and kind of learn from their mistakes. And then eventually I was ready, you know, like to take the throne, you know, I was ready to become the head coach. And also obviously you had an unfair advantage because you're the first rookie coach I know who was like around all the players for like 3 years or something, you know? So you kind of got a little advantage there. But is that just a good movie storyline? Like if in reality, if they'd have just put you in like 2014, would you have been a good coach at that point in time?
Shit. If they had put me in 2014, well, I mean, they put me in summer 2014, but I don't know. I don't think I would have been that great of a coach. Like straight up after Monte, I would have probably did the exact same thing as Scarra did. Be like completely transparent. I think I would have been. Like, at the time, I wasn't like authoritative. I didn't even know how to be authoritative. I could tell people what to do, but like I didn't really know how to like enforce that they actually do it until after Chris. So I think it was the most ideal that I came in right after Chris.
Okay.
For sure. I think I could have done it after Scarra, but I think it was most ideal that I did it after Chris. So
So, I mean, the idea that you mentioned that it was actually your notion to bring in Stixxay and to bring in Huhi instead, I mean, Pobel, that situation was taking care of itself, and then obviously kicking Doublelift. Like, that's another area that's very interesting because actually there's very few Western coaches that I know who ever had any say in the roster. I mean, one of the interesting things I find about Western coaching is that I almost feel like it's a bit unfair because, again, you could get a fantastic coach, and if his only job available is like Team X, and it just so happens the players on Team X don't fit him, or even personality-wise don't fit him, he's kind of shit out of luck, you know. He has to do his best, but not a lot he can do. And so one of the things we've always said is let's wait until they give coaches responsibility. You know, like the idea is, as a coach, you're putting your job on the line, so you should kind of like get what comes with that. You know, you should get to have a say if someone gets benched, or if we pick up this player over that player. So, I mean, how did you convince George and the rest of CLG to kind of like go all in on you like this and give you kind of like, I mean, this is your first season as a coach and you're telling them basically, just kick out that one guy who was the one consistent superstar we had, MVP of the last split, like bring in a rookie, you know, that rookie that we had in for a few weeks, just do all this, don't worry, like trust me on this one. How did you win him over?
I think there was like a lot of trust issues before, like between everyone to like kind of push me like to this position, but like once they eventually like trusted me to take that role, like everybody really respected me. They respected like the decisions I make, and they knew like I was like a core component in like why we succeeded in summer 2015. So I don't know, I guess they just trusted me more. I don't I don't know. I just made sure that I hyped up all of the decisions that we were making to George, especially, that I knew that this was like the right choice. I explained my reasoning, and I think Zach also played like a pretty big part in like the Peter thing. I think George was instantly just like okay with the Pobelter thing, like putting in Huhi instead of Pobelter, because like the reasons that I explained to him, and that I feel like it was overall a better fit like for the team. And then the Peter one, Zach actually, I think, was the big change for that. Because what ended up happening was, I was like, I'm not sure if I want to keep Peter. And then after that, Zach had went to, I think, Devon. And like, this is already public knowledge, so it's not like I'm revealing anything crazy. But he basically said, like, it's me or him. Like, I don't want to do another split that's like, that like he feels limited by his like lane partner, because he felt like he never really wanted to talk to him about 2v2 or like work with him on the 2v2. And then Peter always like felt like both of them just felt like the other one was holding them back at points, which was like really bad for their relationship in general. But during the off season, usually like those feelings like fall off and like people forget about it. So Peter had like no worries as far as that, even though the entire split he was talking about how certain times, you know, like Aphro baits him to die, and Aphro says the same thing about Peter, except for I think Aphro just had more like history with Peter and just knew like all of the bad stuff that Peter had done or whatever, and he just thought that he was like a bit limited by that and wanted a rookie player. So he went up to them and was just like, okay, it's me or him. And then we went with Aphro because, I mean, I wanted Aphro in the first place anyway, so I think Aphro like kind of facilitated that change like for me, I guess.
Okay. So in that first split, it felt like CLG actually becoming a potential champion like snuck up on everyone. Because if you remember, the real storyline of the first split was Immortals had just put together that new team and they were just wrecking everyone. And because Huhi and Reignover obviously had just done that in Fnatic and had that like unbeaten run, everyone actually kind of thought, oh, I guess they're just going to, like, who can stop them, you know? They're not going to do it. So aside from the fact that, okay, yeah, sure, your team was like top 2, top 3, you were like pretty solid still. I mean, even you must have thought at some point in the season, like, Immortals should probably win LCS, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. Like, during the beginning of the split, we were like, okay, they're probably going to win LCS. It's like, and all we were focusing on was, I guess, like, learning as much as possible, improving as much as possible, and, like, building each other up, like, as individuals so that, like, we could all succeed together. So, yeah, when we saw Immortals, we were just like, these guys are, like, light years ahead of us, especially Reignover. Like, Reignover is fucking insane, like, to be like frank. Like we even had him like during the bootcamp this year, which we'll probably get more into later, but like he was like the most innovative jungler for sure, and he changed how every jungler passed that entire split just because he was that much better than every single jungler. So I thought 100% that Immortals was going to win.
Why didn't they?
Hilariously enough, to speak on that topic, they scrimmed us a lot, and I think we may be the only team that actually scrims to learn or improve like certain goals, especially. So we don't always have the best results in scrims because we're not focused on purely just like making sure we crush the enemy in 20 minutes.
Okay.
All of that.
Is this where you're going to tell me that they were just like beating you with Lucian top and you baited them?
So there was some what we will call false positives that came from those scrims, and I remember they were playing some Vladimir and Nivea matchup earlier on in the split too, and Pobelter had an interview that even said, we had a false positive on like the Vladimir and Nivea matchup because we had scrimmed certain people. So there was that, and then later on, they were playing Lucian top against us, they were playing Urgot mid against us, and we were just like, this is so ridiculous. Like they're literally playing, what I'll call like 5-minute champs.
Yeah.
Because they only like, they don't do much after like 5 minutes if they don't get a lead. So I don't know. They were just playing super, super aggressive in scrims. It paid off. They get on stage. We're not playing we were playing pretty aggressive too, to like kind of test our limits. Whereas, TSM on stage is not going to play aggressive against an Urgot mid. They're not going to play aggressive against a Lucian top. They're just going to outscale, right? So that's kind of just what happened in that set, and then they just lost. So
okay,
gotta be depressing for them for sure.
So before the playoff run, again, here's the one really big positive was that you guys were the ones obviously who beat Immortals. Like they'd beaten everyone else, but you guys got the win against them.
Yeah.
You were the only ones, but if you notice, a lot of the compliments about CLG before you won LCS were kind of like very backhanded. Like it would be like, oh, for a team that's, I'll just give you like the blunt version. It would be like, for a team that's shit and that doesn't have any good players, they do play the map very well, don't they? They're very intelligent. Like they know how to be bad players, but everything was like, I'm giving the most extreme version, but it was kind of like that, right? Like everyone was kind of not giving you any chance to win. So what was actually working about the team? What was good about that unit?
I feel like the exact same thing I was explaining like when we were talking about 2015, I feel like me and Zach just really clicked as like a duo. Like we really understand like how to make the best process like possible. I see Zach more as like a partner than I do like a player, because he is like, the team captain. Like we do meetings to make sure that we think the team's going in the right direction, like that kind of thing. And like, at points I still do have to call him out for stuff, but I think that was probably the most impactful thing like between all of that. It was like we had a really solid understanding of like how we wanted to play the game, and like it really showed that week that we had developed like a specific like 1-3-1 style that we were like, okay, we're going to pressure the entire map instead of trying to do what everyone else was doing, which was like 1-4 at the time, which is just like they have an empty lane, so we just put another person in the empty lane that we can pressure 3 lanes. And I think we just developed a really solid style that we knew how exactly we wanted to play the game. And that's about it. Like we tested a lot. We tested a lot of stuff so we could play a bunch of different comps. We found out what was our strengths, what were our weaknesses, and then we just played really, really heavily toward our strengths.
So in the playoffs, it's not as though this run was clean, right? It wasn't like the one before in the summer.
Oh.
So in the Team Liquid series, this was a team that obviously at the end of the season, they really like spiked, they got better and better at the end of the season. Like, what was this series like? Because obviously it was like a full 5-game series. What was the core like thing that you take away from it?
In that series, I think I learned that sometimes it's really good to just pick champs that are better on this based on the situation rather than like based on what you practiced. But that's like, sometimes. Yeah. It's like we were really limited by the fact that they were playing Kaelin, for example, because we didn't play any long range AD carries at the time. So I think it was like we just put Trevor in the situation where he could carry as Caitlyn when we played against them eventually, because every single time, I swear this is going to happen for all of League of Legends.
Yeah.
Eventually, when it comes down to it, at playoffs, at Worlds, the only, one of the major factors in it is always range, like in draft. During the regular split, usually it doesn't matter. Everybody just loses out of lane phase. They just pressure super hard, and then range doesn't matter that much because you can just beat a worse team through rotations. But when it comes down to it, and like it always comes down to like a team fight at Worlds that you're gonna either win or lose, range is like the most impactful thing. So playing like Caitlyn, Tristana, Jinx, like that's been at every single Worlds meta for like as long as I can remember. You know, like Corki Rockets, that kind of stuff. Like, and that series showed like I guess our mental fortitude and like constantly like challenged us like the entire way. I was actually like really proud of the team, like how I think that was our first. No, it wasn't our first best of 5 because we played against Origin. That was our first playoffs performance, like as a team. I felt like we kept our mind in the right place, like throughout the entire time. We didn't really choke. We didn't really like mess up too much. We just like pushed ourselves to like be better every game. Like part of our like process went into the post game between every game. And that was like really impactful. So I could like criticize, you'd be like, okay, like you played that really wrong. Like you need to change like X, Y, and Z so that we don't fuck this up again. And then, you know, instantly into the next game we go, and you know, the problem's fixed like that. And I thought that was one of the really interesting things I had learned like from that set.
Sure. What actually, when you got to the final and you were facing TSM, like sure that TSM team had their own problems. I mean, they had a lot of issues that split, but I mean, they had just like stomped Immortals basically. Like, what was your mindset going into that?
Well, we're always really confident. We just focus like I said, like purely on the process. Like that's 100% like our focus like the entire time. So we just did everything in our power that we could to make sure that like we came out of that like tournament with like the win. And personally, like my feelings were, I wasn't sure like how good TSM had gotten because we didn't scrim them for a decent amount of time, like leading up to that point. So we weren't sure how good they had become since they had just beaten Immortals, right? And we were losing in scrims to Immortals, we were losing in scrims to Team Liquid. I think like our scrim record overall was like 1-17 or something before like we played that match. And I think like scrimming Team Liquid actually won us that match, because Team Liquid had taught us how to like properly pressure bottom. Like, I thought Dardoch was like really impactful for them because he always like knew how to open the map like really quickly. He would break the game into mid game like as soon as possible. Like that was something that we learned and really needed to like be able to win that set, because if you like look back at the games, it was like every single game we broke bottom as fast as we could. We fast pushed the turret down, you know, mid laner roamed over, and just always we were breaking that bottom turret first. And that was like whoever broke the bottom turret wins the game. Like there's even a video of me like, I think it's Eyes on MSI or whatever. Me exactly saying that statement. Whoever breaks bottom is going to win the set. So all we did was we just focused on breaking bottom, and since we had the best practice possible, like scrimming TL like the entire week, like I don't know if I shouldn't say that because it's like a practice thing. But yeah, we had scrimmed against them the entire time. So we had just learned like what the best way to do it is, and then we just executed like perfectly on stage.
Obviously, as someone who'd been around Doublelift a long time, he was in the teams that you were doing the pick ban for, all these sorts of things. Do you have a sense for how to play against Doublelift? Like, I mean, sure, this will sound harsh, right? But one of the good things about being a coach of someone is you quickly learn what the flaws of your own player is, you know? And obviously you're trying to avoid them when you're the coach, but when you're the opposing coach, surely you're just trying to like bait them into that sort of thing, you know?
Yeah. I mean, we were even talking about it. Like, in our scouting, it was just like, there wasn't anything like too appalling, I guess. I would be like, okay, Peter 100% is going to do this. I remember like when they first made the new TSM roster and like he had just swapped over, we had talked about it a ton, how like, you know, he overextends a lot, right? That was like one of his long lasting like issues. He would be in a side lane at like 40 minutes and just die. Like sometimes, you know, even now, like that stuff like slips up and it happens. We had brought up specific stuff like that, but there was nothing too crazy. I think like one game, only like one game did we pick like a skill shot champion against Peter, because I specifically remember whenever he plays against like Thresh, Morgana, whatever, he gets hit by just like a ton of skill shots, or at least he used to. So I remember like that only maybe affected like one draft that we decided to pick like a skill shot champ against him, because the way that he plays, like, this is going to sound pretty funny too, but the way that he plays is he plays pretty much always on locked camera, or at the time he did.
Yeah.
So if if hooks came from off screen and he didn't have, you know, the warning, right?
Yeah.
Like the warning of like the beginning animation, because the thresh hook has the wind up and all that. So all he'll see is the thresh hook, you know, when it's already traveling.
Sure.
So you know, you get maybe like 0.2 less seconds to react to it because you just don't have the animation on your screen. There's things along that line. Yeah, it's pretty funny.
That's pretty good though. That's good. That's a nice little thing to have in your back pocket just for one game, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, I just remember like when we did scrim them when he first swapped over though, we killed him probably like 4 times overextending because Zion just said, "Watch, I'm gonna kill Peter," and then he stood in a bush, and then Peter pushed up an extra wave when he shouldn't have, and then he killed him like 3 times doing it the exact same way in like one scrim block. It was pretty funny. But during the split, he fixed all of that. So when we got to the finals, it wasn't like, I guess it wasn't like too impactful to have all that information, right? Because he had been with a different team for, you know, 4 or 5 months at that time.
Right, when people try to hype up the storyline that, like, you know, it was like revenge for the CLG guys, or he was trying to get revenge on you guys and stuff, like, I understand on one level why that doesn't work, because ultimately, well, I mean, the main goal for everyone is win the championship. Like, who really cares who you beat to do that, you know? But when you consider like some of the issues he'd had with Doublelift in the team, some of the issues that some of the teammates had with him, you know, to then face him in the finals and win in like this game 5 fashion again, also like think of the storyline, like everyone's saying your team doesn't have any good like star players, their team has like all the star players, you know. What did it add an extra level of satisfaction, or do you think for some of the people in the team maybe it added a little bit of oomph?
For me personally, no. I don't think for anyone else either. Maybe for Zach. But what I do think for sure is that more so, none of us really had any like malice toward Peter. It was more so everybody had like issues with the community and like how they perceived it.
Okay.
Because the community was entirely like, okay, you guys lost Peter, you guys are shit, you guys are gonna get fucking rolled, like all of that, right? And I guess like a giant like fuck you to the community by like stomping, or like we didn't even stomp, to be honest, like we just beat them by one team fight. But like the feeling of like proving people wrong is like probably the thing that like definitely carried us the most during that split, and why I think we had a lot of problems during this split was like that was like our pure source of motivation, was like us proving people wrong when they kept on saying, you know, like CLG is going to do nothing, they're going to be a bottom 5 team. Yeah. It's like, okay, we're going to prove them wrong. We're going to make ourselves like the best team, like just by improving our process over and over, focus on the process. Don't care about if we lose. When we lose, we just have like a meeting that's like, okay, how did we lose? What can we do better to improve this? You know, everybody gives feedback to each other, and then we just like, we push on, right? So I don't know, that was probably just for sure like the thing there. It was just us trying to push against the community rather than like against any particular person.
When I set up the storyline of like, is it more pressure, you know, to be a rookie coach and then have like rookies in your team, etc., and you've got all these different factors going on. If it pays off though, and you actually win, I mean, you must realize this. It means that as the coach, people are going to give you more credit, right? If you'd have just won with the exact same roster they had last year, people could have been like, okay, you did a good job. It was the same team that was the champions the season before. Was it? What was the meaning for you in winning that split? What was significant?
That meant honestly like everything to me. Like that was like my happiest moment for sure, like in life so far. Like proving everybody wrong, just like countless people. Like, you know, I have tweets that are essentially like death threats at me, like, why would you get rid of Peter? And like to show everyone, I guess, like our side and like what I had learned from like all of the previous experiences, right? Like we had a lot of issues with our process. We built a team to have the best process, and it worked. So it felt really, really good. Yeah, it was definitely the best feeling I've ever had.
So when you then went to MSI, I mean, this just kind of shows like the story of this roster. So even though, you know, you've beaten TSM, you've won the split, like Immortals didn't win, all the rest of it, everyone was still sort of like, yeah, but they're going to get smashed at MSI. It's like, even if somehow they did it, you know, they fluked it in NA, but they're going to be shit at MSI. What changed between playoffs, where it was super close, and all these series of best of fives? What changed to allow you to be like doing so well in the group stage? I mean, beating SK Telecom, obviously that's like mind-blowing stuff if you're an NA team, right?
Yeah. We were actually incredibly surprised. When we went to MSI, we, once again, as per usual, we didn't have any like solid expectations from us. Like everybody was just like, okay, they're probably gonna get fifth. NA's not gonna get a seed.
Yeah.
And then like we went there and we were actually surprised at how low the level of like play was. Like we were actually like it's really dumb to say the gap is closing and like all of that. Like I felt at that moment because we had went to MSI. We scrimmed against G2. Scrims went okay. We scrimmed against RNG. RNG was like I think by far like the best scrim team. So yeah. I mean, Stage is different from scrims obviously, but and then we played against SKT and we were just like, it didn't seem as though they were practicing anything specifically. They were just playing the game really poorly. So I don't know if they were like intentionally just like seeking information, or something like that. Because the way that they banned in game or in the draft was like they wanted to see new champs from us every time. So like, for example, if we play like Maokai, Kindred, Rise, they would next game ban Maokai, Kindred, Rise, so they could see 3 more champs in our scrims that we like played against them. So it felt like they were almost like intentionally throwing the game so that they could get information for free, right?
Did that piss you off?
I mean, a little bit, because I was just like, why are they doing that? Like, that's kind of a dick move. But then, as we scrimmed them more, it just felt like they weren't that strong. And I think that really showed during the group stages. Like, they were doing really, really poorly. Like, they got beaten by Flash Wolves, they got beaten by RNG, we beat them. I don't remember if any other team beat them. I think so.
I think that's it. But they lost 2 to Flash Wolves, I think, was the thing.
Yeah, you're right. And we were just absolutely like surprised at like how possible it was to win the tournament.
Okay, so when you say that though, when you say that in scrims, okay, they were doing this, like, at first you think maybe they're just trying to like essentially find out what I'm doing without giving anything away,
Yeah.
When they're doing that at first, that would make sense then if they come into the group stage games, it's like, haha, like you see at Worlds every year and they just smash you and you're like, oh, fuck, this bullshit. But when you're beating them in the actual group stage, I mean, what does that do to your mindset? Were you really just thinking like, holy shit, we could win MSI?
Yeah, for sure. Like we did. We played against them in scrims. We played like really well, like to the point where we beat them every single game in scrims. We played against RNG. We had like 50% against RNG. We played against G2. We had like maybe like 70% with G2. And we were pretty confident. We thought that we were actually like we could win the tournament like really easily. And then when we did play against SKT in the group stages, like that game we were behind in the first, I think 10 minutes of the game, all the way until 20 minutes, and then we brought it back and like won the game, even though Faker was on his undefeated LeBlanc at the time.
Yep.
So we were the team that put like that loss on his LeBlanc. So
no, he'd lost the year before in the last game of MSI, if you remember. To
you're right.
But he had, I think that had been the only other time.
Loss.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that was
the
second
one.
loss then. And then that was like
still pretty good.
Incredible. Yeah, that was incredible, like to experience.
Okay.
And it was a comeback game. And I think that was one of the things we were the best at for sure, like at the tournament, was coming back. You can see that in our SKT matches too. Because first game we played against him in the finals, we were down 5k gold. We brought it back. We were up 3k gold, and then we threw. Yeah. Second game, we got a lead, lost it, and then brought it back, and then we had lost again. And yeah.
So if you were even aware of that part, okay, the part that is LeBlanc, like it was obviously it still was almost like permaban status if people thought he would play it,
Yeah.
Was that in the back of your mind when they locked it in? Like, shit, almost no one wins against this. It's got to at least cross your mind, right?
Oh, for sure. I was on stage and I was just like, oh, LeBlanc. Because at that point, I don't think we saw any LeBlanc play. I think he was the first LeBlanc of the tournament, even though it had been played in scrims.
Yeah.
By Xiaohu.
Maybe
to
Maple?
my knowledge. Oh, you're right. It was Maple.
Yeah.
Maple was playing it in scrims before anyone else. So we had only maybe I think 2 games of practice against it. And Jay was under the assumption that Azir actually beats LeBlanc, and he was the only person at the tournament that thought that. He actually he went even every single time that he played that matchup. And it was just because you have to play super, super aggressive, so you need jungle pressure, but you can still win the matchup if you play really aggressive. And you can see when he played against Faker, he was up CS. I mean, to be fair, like, Faker TP'd away, but it was, he was, like, constantly up CS, pressuring him into tower so you couldn't roam after, like, level 9. And, yeah. But when I was standing on stage, and he had picked LeBlanc, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, like, whatever his ridiculous record is, something like 33-1 on LeBlanc, and I see that, and I was just like, okay, guys, and then I just, fake confidence my way all the way through, like, I guess, like, closing speech before I get off stage.
Yeah.
And I was just like, you guys got this, like, just all of that, like, even though I had, like, kind of lost confidence for a second, I just had to refocus and, instill confidence within the team so that they felt like they were prepared for the situation.
Right, there's a famous thing that people try to say. It's like an aspect of bravado to a degree, where they always try to claim, right, that when you're coaching or you're playing against an amazing player, what you should do is pretend you don't even know it's him, Pretend I'm just against that champion. Like, how do I deal with the block? Okay, so what's funny is a famous example of this, that's like a pretty good example, is Doublelift used to claim that, like, he just took the nameplates off when he played, so he would just learn to play. Now, the difference is, okay, I can sort of understand why Doublelift might do it, because he actually might be good enough that he could also then deal with the person he's playing with, but like, if you're playing against Faker, for example, I mean, obviously you had all these games at MSI in the final and in the group stage. Is there a part of you, though, is like very aware that, like, it is like Faker we're playing against, so I'm coaching against here? Is that in the back of your mind?
I don't let it affect the decisions I make.
Okay.
But I do think that it is noteworthy for sure. Like, I don't want to be like, okay, we got to ban, we have to ban only 3 mid laners because we're playing against Faker.
Sure.
But I do think that it's always something to take into account, but I don't let it affect my decision making, I guess, that he's like a good player.
Does it make it harder to kind of motivate your mid laner, though? I mean, you can't just basically be like, you're going to smash him, don't worry about it.
No, actually, like, I think Jay just had his own self-confidence. Like, he felt like he was better than, like, a lot of the players at the tournament. And I think just his self-confidence carried him through, like, that match in particular.
Okay.
I don't think I did anything, like, in particular that helped his motivation outside of maybe just saying, like, you guys got this, and, like, rooting him on.
Yeah.
Like, kind of putting him in that position. But he was in a good matchup, he said. And he's against, Faker. So it's like, if he's in a good matchup against Faker, he's probably going to feel more confident. So.
Okay. So when you got, like, the second seed and in the semi-finals you're playing Flash Wolves, this series was, like, very fun to watch, but I want to get your take as a coach, because I actually have found Flash Wolves to be one of the weirdest teams I've ever seen play League. Because I remember this series they played against you reminded me of Worlds when they played Origin, because somehow they can get, like, leads, it feels like, on anyone. They get like the first 15 minutes, I don't know what they do, but they just dynamite, like, castles everywhere, and then somehow they can also lose every lead against everyone, it feels like. It's like, I don't know how they do it. You'd think one skill would offset the other, but it's like both are connected somehow. What is the secret to playing Flash Wolves, do you think?
Oh, jeez. For us, it was fighting their mid control. I mean, when we played against them, it was only, like, Maple and Karsa were, like, the huge impactful, like, people on the team. It's like NL is, like, a break-even type AD carry. Like, he's not really going to outmaneuver you, outplay you. He's just going to farm even and then play, like, a utility style. And then top laner MMD was, like, an Echo player. So I believe we just took away Echo and then played to pressure mid from, like, the side lanes.
Okay.
So Maple, at the time, he was, like, an insane GP player. I remember we beat his GP, which was, like, insane to me, because I didn't think he would play it. He was, like, the only person that played GP, and he picked it into a bad matchup. So, yeah, I think when we played against them, we just tried to focus side lanes and then pressure it toward mid, and then Karsa and Maple couldn't really do anything. They couldn't really pressure the map.
Okay.
The interesting thing for sure about that series was like the support pinch, like from the bans. Like, everybody was banning supports during that set. So we had to bust out Sona, which we had played one game in scrims. And that was that's always going to be a really memorable moment, because we were standing on stage and we were like, huh. So they banned every single support, and then they took Nami. Uh, so we looked at all of our other options. We were like, okay, we can go Blitzcrank. We can go. I think we actually decided it was going to be either Blitzcrank or Sona. But we decided we wanted stronger Engage so that we could see the Kindred. And then Zach like played it out of his mind actually on like his like second game ever playing Sona. He just like kept on landing like really clutch ultis on Kindred before he could ulti. And it was really done by Karsa. Holy.
No?
Oh, by Karsa to not buy a QSS. Yeah. It was really bad by him to not buy a QSS during that series because Zach had just been, like basically just like roll. Like his role was to stop the Kindred ulti. Yeah. And the Kindred didn't buy a QSS, to take away that possibility. He just like built regular items to do more damage, and then he just got like messed up over and over.
Okay. So in the final, you kind of touched already on like the way it went. Like, you were able to get back into games, even though they got the early lead, which obviously, again, it's quite rare that a Western team can do this. But one question I want to ask you is, just because I want to see what your take on it is. So this might sound like, again, like, Jesus, can't we ever get a break? Like, even if you're in the final of the MSI, right, there's still kind of a way I can, like, downplay that. Because I have to say this, okay. RNG did win the group stage. They got the number one seed, and everyone was like, right, here's your present. You get to play SK Telecom in a best of 5. And they were like, cheers. And then they lost. And as a result, they just went out in the semis. So it's true. You guys played very well against SKT. You played obviously well against Flash Wolves. Who do you think was actually the second best team in this tournament? Like, how would you have matched up, for example, if, say, you'd been 2 and 3 and you'd have played them in the semis? What do you think would have happened?
I mean, honestly speaking, from outside perspective, I think people could probably call us the third place team that tournament. Okay. If the groups had shaked out where it was, SKT versus us or Flash Wolves. Yeah. I think that kind of like shows it for sure that we were at least the top third team.
Yeah.
We did actually think that RNG was the best team at the tournament. Like just from scrims, just from like seeing how they play the map, how they play the game.
What were they so good
at? The idea of countering someone's setup before they can actually get in position. So everyone has like set plays, I guess, is like what you can call it.
Okay.
So when you're trying to pressure the map, your goal is to get on the other side of the map, on the enemy side of the map as soon as possible, right? So you want to run almost immediately there. And what they would do is they would do the exact same thing. They run exactly where you want to run, and they just stop you in your tracks so that you can't push in. And that's like what they were 100% better at than like any team, for sure. And a lot of teams actually still don't do this. I think TSM was decent at it. I think Immortals got decent at it, but like no team still like to this day is like amazing at that, like more than what I feel like RNG was during that tournament. But clearly they didn't show it like on stage. I think they played like really, really uncharacteristically on stage. I'm not like sure what the reason of that was. Maybe it was like built from the players or something, but they had like a really, really solid play style that should, in theory, be like the best way to play the game, in my opinion.
So I remember that as CLG is starting to have these results with like the non-Doublelift lineup, eventually people couldn't just forever be like, well, they're all just crap and somehow they're magically winning. Like eventually people had to start saying, right, some of these players are good. So for example, I remember a player who it felt like kind of got redeemed a bit was actually as Xmithie. People started to finally be like, okay, this guy's actually one of the better junglers. And the interesting thing for me was, like, I can understand why back in the day when he was in Vulcan, he was very hyped. Because if you think of like what his style of play was then, is he wasn't just like a very good mechanical jungler, but he was also just getting like a very good mid laner at the time rolling, and then they would just take over the game, So it's very easy, like that's very flashy, People are going to be able to see and understand what the jungler's doing at that point in time and why he's a key element. But in CLG, I mean, admittedly, in the first lineup, there was the one where, unfortunately, that Monte Vodra review where he saw him doing the Sejuani ult and missing it, kind of stuck in people's minds a bit. But yeah. I think people weren't quite sure what style of jungler he was in CLG or what he did in the later CLG lineup. So what has Xmithie's style been in your era, in your lineup that you've had Stixxay and Huhi? What's he done for the team? What's his job?
I would say he's probably the most consistent, for sure. His job, I guess, is like he seems to be like more of like the father figure of the team, I would say, like of the roster. It's like he's more of the person that's going to say no in game like Zach is very much the person that, like, kind of empowers people and like pushes them to be the best, but Xmithie is like the person that keeps them in check, I guess, would be the way to put it.
Okay.
In game, like style wise, he can play just about any style. Like he's shown that he can play supportive style, he can play the engage role, he can play carry role, but I would say it takes him just a little bit of time to like play within that meta to become like really, really good and like excel.
Right. At MSI particularly was when like Aphromoo looked super good, because if you think even of the way the games were taking place, because it wasn't just like split the map like you did in the regular season. I mean, you won against Flash Wolves just team fighting, for example, just like turning team fights on them. And obviously that's something where it's quite noticeable that like presumably the shot caller's having a big impact there. You know, he's making the call of when to go in or when to be decisive. Like, how much of a shot calling role has Aphromoo played in the team? Obviously, he's the captain overall, but is he like the lone voice? Is he the guy where gets to make the decision? How does it work with Aphromoo in that sense?
I think during the MSI era, he was, like, to break into numbers, he was something like maybe 50% of the comms.
Okay.
I would say, like, if you divide it up, it's like he has like the largest role. Whenever it hits mid game, he instantly just like turns on and he like has to carry the game forward with either what lead we have or what disadvantage we have. And what happens before that point is, you know, everyone else's duty. So everyone else is focused on the early game. It's like Jake leads the early game and tries to get everyone to give as much information as possible so that we can make the early game work so that we have an advantage. And then Zach takes all of the responsibility after that and just like shows how we can win the game, even if we have a deficit. He's just been super like solid in that department.
So does part of this kind of like ability to come back in the game, does some of that come from Aphromoo?
Yeah, I think the entire team has really solid resilience though, and not at every point is it going to be that, you know, like Zach's super on fire, I guess, when it comes to like being behind, especially because, you know, that can really pay like a mental toll on you. Like to be behind, especially like if you get behind like every game. So other people, like especially Huhi, steps up a lot when we're behind to make sure that we're, I guess, going to like the right area. Like the thing I just explained about like RNG, how like, you know, they instantly go to the right spot. That's like something that Jay would help Zach with a lot because Zach wasn't always like the best at calling it.
Okay. So probably the most maligned member of CLG, even to this day, is Huhi. Because here's the thing, right? It's one thing, everyone can think, right, that Thorin just picks people that he says sucks and that becomes a meme and then he just plays on it, you know, and he goes on. But it's one thing if it's just me doing it, right? Like, I don't even claim to be an expert on League of Legends, dude. But I don't know any nice way to say this. I don't know any mid laner who's a pro who thinks Hui's good. Now, they don't all say he sucks, but I don't know anyone who thinks he's like an individually good player. And I mean, we recently had Froggen on the show. He basically literally thinks he's just some like mad Orion Soul one-trick pony. Like, how would you explain why CLG has success with Huhi? Like, what does he do within the team? What is he like as a player? Like, are we seeing it all wrong? Is he secretly some amazing player that we don't know about?
I mean, I think everybody is entitled to have their own opinion, but sure. I think, at least for me and the team, like he plays the role that we need him to play in most games. Obviously, there's going to be times, you know, where he messes up. Like notably, so it was, I think, either this season or last season when he played against TSM. He got like solo killed in a really like uncharacteristic way, and I think he has some questionable moments where it's just like you can't really tell what just happened or like for what reason. It's just like quite frankly, he just makes like a huge blunder for no reason. Like we just can't figure out why he would make some blunder. But overall, I would say as long as he's put in a situation where he's comfortable, he has the ability to, like, at least now this split, he has the ability now to like help with shot calling and like pushing the game forward. So I would say this split, like Zach has taken like less reins, I guess. Like before, he put in like all of the work in game, so he had gotten like really burnt out. So like this split, Jay took like a bit more of that responsibility, and for me especially, I just feel like one, we don't play the game to make him look good. 2, in my opinion, he plays his role well because he's just getting like pounded by the matchup because he has to sacrifice his lane matchup. Plus, he has to sacrifice his like he's not going to get jungle pressure because we didn't know how to pressure mid during the split at all. And then he's doing pretty well in team fights. I mean, like I said, he still has his question mark moments where it was like, okay, he missed how many Azir ultis, at MSI. But I would say that like he has the heart that like makes him like a really strong player. Like no matter what happens, he gets knocked down like 1,000 times, he always gets back up, and we have the right team to build him back up so that he always feels like confident and comfortable. I think that if you put him on a comfort champ, let's say Aurelion Sol, Ryze, and like if you find those champs, he can be like that one-man army type player. But it's just like all about unlocking that within him and like finding a way to make that consistent.
Does he have some sort of, like, how much of this style of play that he's developed comes from him or comes from like the team and what they ask of him? Because for example, like one thing that seems very unique about him is, like, I'm used to obviously mid laners being like the star player. I mean, it's to be in the position in the history of League of Legends that most of the carries are at because, I mean, you can always have 1v1 lane, that sort of thing. So it's very rare that I've ever seen a scenario where the mid laner is like, for example, like the disengage or like just basically almost like the fucking laser pointer for the cats to jump on while the AD carries off on one side. Like this is very weird to see. It works, but I don't know. So how much of that comes from him and how much is like just developed?
I think it honestly developed because of a lot of like the issues we had during scrims. Like when we were trying to, like I said, we focused really heavily on the process. So it's like one of the things that we tried to work on really heavily was finding a way to properly get mid control. So we like watched a lot of VODs to like see how to do it properly and all that. But like, it took us a really long time to like pick up how to properly do it, and that's why we lost a lot of games during like this split, especially. But I do feel like a lot of that was imposed because of issues that we made, or like things that we couldn't figure out how to solve efficiently. And it kind of just made him look really bad, I guess.
When people criticize, I mean, one of the main areas they often criticize him is champion pool. Like, I mean, it's obviously going too far to say he can only play Aurelion Sol because, for example, that didn't even exist back like when you were first using him. So he obviously could play other champion. What do you think about the argument about champion pool? How do you evaluate him in that sense?
I would just go back to my previous point where I said I feel like if he's on a comfortable champ, then he's going to like destroy everything. Like when he played Aurelion Sol, it's pretty clear he's going to destroy the game. He's going to carry it to the point that they have to ban the champ, and we knew that that champ was going to be banned. Like we practiced it only like something like maybe 10-15 games in the Korean boot camp, and we were like, okay, that champ's probably going to be banned because he was just crushing every single team with it. When we had played Ryze, when Ryze was really good back at MSI, it's like we knew everybody was going to ban that against him. So I think, yes, his champion pool at times can be really limited, but I think that once he becomes really comfortable, especially in like the certain matchups, he can kind of turn his brain off, I guess, for like that matchup, and then focus more on the game and how he can have an impact on the game. Because I think he has really good intuition on when he like wants to leave mid lane and help the team move around the map, like all of that. I think he has really, really good intuition, but he doesn't really unlock that unless he plays a champion or plays in a matchup where he understands when he can do that.
Right. So, okay, the only member of the team we haven't talked about, there's actually two, I guess, so we'll go through them as well, right? So we'll go now to Stixxay, because the thing about this guy is, like, the more I watch him, the more I think he's good. Don't think he's like some superstar necessarily, but the problem is, he did hit an insane wave of hype for MSI. Like, you can never know in the scenario what people are seeing. Like, I mean, obviously people, I think, like, the other AD carries in the tournament, like, he is the best AD carry, like some crazy statements like that, how do you evaluate him as a player in this? Because, I mean, when you were describing here, when you were thinking about bringing him in, because when he subbed for Doublelift, I mean, this sounds like you thought he was going to be super fire, right? Like, he was incredible in scrims, etc. After now coaching him for a couple of splits and seeing, like, the full spectrum of, depending on what the meta is and the matchups and stuff, What is Stixxay? Who is Stixxay as a player?
Me personally, I thought like when he first came in, he was mechanically like one of the best AD carries like I've seen. Like I thought almost instantly, like, I mean, it's gonna sound like kind of cocky or whatever, but I felt like he was better than Peter, like right when he started playing, because I even saw like in scrims especially, like he would outplay him on like a 1v1 basis. In team fights he would get, you know, average more damage with like similar like champion styles, and overall it just felt like we like got more out of him like as a player. But that being said, I think as a person, he was really, really underdeveloped because he was only 18. Like, he had just graduated high school, and then he essentially flew out to play in the LCS with us. So he had, like, no life experience. He didn't know how to talk to people. Like, I don't even think he did, like, actual sports, like, during high school. So he didn't even have that, like, basic level of, like, team. So when he came in, like my other coach, my assistant coach, Mike, he tried to get Trevor to run, which was like the funniest thing to me, because like I've never seen a player actually just say no before. Like he straight up just said no, like I don't want to run, like this is stupid, I'm not going to run because I messed up in a game. And then, you know, eventually, like as time went on, he improved like vastly. Like he's fully like on board. He has like a really good mindset, and I think that he's probably going to be like one of the best AD carries in North America for a really long time, or as long as he stays within the scene.
Okay. So, right, here's the thing. I've got to set up the context here, to be fair, okay, Zikz. So, in the summer split, CLG wasn't doing that hot for the regular split, okay? It wasn't going so well. It wasn't looking like you were going to win LCS, and he didn't, obviously. Meanwhile, TSM, they kind of got it together. They were dominating. They won every single series except one. And at the end of the regular split, everyone submitted their votes for who's the best player at each position, who's the MVP, all the rest of it, right? And here's the thing, right? There was really only one discussion going on, which was, who is the MVP? Is it Bjergsen or is it Doublelift? Like, they'd won everything, they dominated everything, they almost like never lost lane, you know? So at this point in time, it's almost like, well, which you prefer? Like, you prefer vanilla or chocolate? That's like the only debate out there. So in this world where Zikz submits his sheet, you know, like there were some coaches, okay, who picked their own player, but they were doing it to be assholes. Like they were just trolling. Like I think the fucking NRG guy like put some of his players in. I was like, really, bro? Like I can't remember who it was. Like the Envious or something. I was like, for real. Oh. But here's the thing, okay? Zikz actually picked Stixxay as the best AD carry, and did you put Doublelift second or was it third?
Was
it second?
I actually don't know. I think it was second.
Okay, right. The problem with that is
I don't think any other AD carry would have been on that list.
Right. Obviously, I'm going to give you a chance to explain why that would be. Why Stixxay in the summer split was better than Doublelift. Because you kind of like touched on it a little bit, and it was a genuine opinion. It wasn't trolling. Yeah. But you know the problem is, externally, everyone's just going to be like, well, he's salty, isn't he? He's just mad against Doublelift. Like, you can understand why people think that, right? So what are the real reasons in the summer split why Stixxay was a better AD carry than Doublelift?
I think the way I interpreted the voting could have been different from what was intended. But
that's a political answer to start with. Come on.
Oh yeah. Anyways, but what I felt like what I just explained, I still feel like as a player, the best player. Maybe I just completely overlooked like the performance of the split when I was looking at it.
Okay.
But I was thinking, as a player, like in a mechanical level, I felt like Stixxay is the best AD carry, like on a mechanical level, like I already said. But when I think of the out-of-game impact and like, you know, looking at interviews and what has been said, what I've heard like through the grapevine, like all that stuff, is like I've heard that Doublelift is like, he is like a changed man, and that he has like a lot of impact elsewhere. Like from my perspective, his impact is shown in how he pressures the map, not necessarily how he plays as an AD carry.
Okay.
I don't think he is the best at that role, but I think he was the most valuable player because he unlocked something in North America that other players could not. In a sense, like the one play that like I credit him entirely for, which was like a super impactful play, and like this happens like all the time now in competitive League of Legends, was just something as simple as like you push the wave, and then you roam to another lane. For whatever reason.
This is Doublelift we're talking about here?
Yes, this is Doublelift we're talking about.
Just checking.
This is something that other teams like just didn't do. Like every other team would just push the lane in, and then just like hang out in lane. They'd just S key. They'd just sit there. But what TSM was doing the entire split, and you could tell that it was Doublelift doing it because no other lane was doing it like to that effect, was he just pushed in the lane, didn't care about the 1v1, didn't care about the 2v2, pushed in the lane. He would roam mid and then make a play on mid over and over, over and over. And I didn't credit him as the best AD carry because I didn't feel like mechanically he was better, but I felt like strategically and like as like a shot caller he was better, which is why I put him as the best for, or the MVP, and then not as the MVP AD carry.
So he was a better player, but Stixxay was a better AD carry.
Yes, that's exactly it.
Right, I understand the rationale at least. It makes more sense if you explain it that way. Right, so the last player to talk about is Zion Spartan. Now, this is another player that I think has a really confusing like past and role even sometimes. Because, for example, when you think of the first split CLG 1, the summer split of Season 5, because he has this like matchup advantage and he has more champions in his pool, and this is like a key storyline to how you're able to win that final so dominantly, it means that I've noticed whenever things are going really well, the same storyline gets repeated about Zion. It's like he's the best NA top by far, you know, like he's the only one that has like can play anything, and you know he's just like the best split pusher, etc., etc. But then there'll also be times where, like for example, some of the worlds where he's just not as effective, you know, and it just like this seems to be like that. Somewhat, I'm like, where is the best NA top player if that happens? So how do you see Zion Spartan? Like, what are the nuances to him as a player and a person?
As a person, he is like the most like self-improvement focused like person that I probably know, like out of like everyone I've ever met. You know, he does literally everything he can to like be the best person he can be on like a daily basis. So he like constantly goes and like experiences new things. Like he does acting lessons, he does dance lessons, he does singing lessons, he does, you know, guitar lessons. Like he does like everything so that he can like, you know, experience everything and learn to be the best. And like he during the season actually just sits at his computer the entire time, scouts the opponents. He does like everything perfect. Like that's like, to me, he is like the ideal player when it comes like the process overall. So I like 100%, like I think that he is like already really solid when it comes to like the process and all of that. As far as everything else goes, I think one of the issues he has and has like shown is he is really good at the carry style, and we want to put him in that position, but a lot of the time he wants other people to succeed more than he wants himself to succeed. So he'll try to let other people carry on the team, even though he knows that he can carry. I'm not sure like exactly why that is, but he feels like because I've seen him play in scrims even like nowadays. Like when we pressure his lane, he can absolutely like 1v5 the game, like push the game like over. But I mean, obviously that's scrims. But at some points, for whatever reason, he just, I think like every international tourney we've gone to, it's like we've put him on like a tankier type champ, and then when we put him on a carry type champ, he doesn't play as aggressively as he should.
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure like what the like core issue is with that. I notice he gets a lot of criticism, but I don't feel like it's always entirely warranted.
Okay. So coming into this year's Worlds, obviously, even though like, you know, you've been in control of the team now for a whole year, you had the MSA result, you had the spring result, I actually noticed that coming into Worlds, one of the reasons why everyone was actually shitting on G2 is they were like, oh, they got an easy group, it's bullshit, like, you know, who the fuck is CLG, they can't do anything, like, you know, in fact, if you remember, people were even quite mad that you were even going to Worlds. They were like, it shows that the seeding, you know, like the circuit point system should be removed, like Immortals obviously would beat them, and now we're sending this team that was only good, you know, 6 months ago. So people really, realistically, had no expectations for you. I mean, I didn't think you would be able to come second in the group or anything, but I did think that, like, your team at least knows how to play the map, etc. You must have a chance at an upset here. What were your own expectations going into that group?
Well, we thought we were gonna I personally thought like when I saw the draw that we were going to get at least second,
Okay.
because I knew we had played against G2, and I think like the mindset of like I'll just not say that. That's that's not good to say. I think that like we played against G2 like in scrim, so we kind of like were able to feel them out, I suppose. Like we weren't sure exactly when we were going to or who was going to be in our group. So when we got to Korea, we looked at all the people who were here, and like G2 was one of them. So we got some scrims with them, and they were decent. I think they beat us like 3-2 or something like that. Like, but we thought that we were going to get second in the group because we had known that the way we played that was off and like all this other nonsense, but we were just confident. I don't know. I can't really explain it.
So in terms of how the actual group played out, like, I mean, the unfortunate part for you obviously is you did it. You beat G2. That's all great. Good stuff. You even managed to beat Rocks. Like, if I told you all that part, it's like I could really fuck with you if I did like an M. Night Shyamalan movie, you know? I'm like, listen, dude, it really works out. Like, you beat G2, you beat Rocks. You're like, sick, right? So we get into the playoffs. I'm like, yeah, problem is that wildcard team that no one knows actually, like, bodies everyone. That team had to come out of nowhere, right? How much could you really have known about them before then?
Not much. Like, seriously, not much. We played... it's actually so depressing, too. Because they didn't get any scrims or anything. And then I think we just, like... We played really uncharacteristically. Like, both times
Did
we played
CLG also deny them scrims?
Well, we couldn't scrim them. They were in our group.
Oh, right. Sure, yeah. But okay, yeah, good point.
We did scrim INTZ.
Right.
So we weren't entirely like denying all of the wildcard teams. We honestly like we prioritize diversity over everything. Like we want to scrim as many teams as possible and see like feel out everybody instead of, have like one scrim partner.
Okay.
But yeah,
like, how much of ANX's results was like legit? Like they played well. Like, I mean, it can't be an exaggeration. Literally every team in the group almost certainly hadn't played them and probably didn't do that much research, right?
I think that ANX had some solid results, and it wasn't because like we always just played bad. Like I think the wildcard teams have gotten like tons better. Like that gap has also like closed. We played against Supermassive, and like other teams would struggle against Supermassive in the early game too, like when we were at MSI. And then we played against INTZ, and even INTZ was like a pretty solid team. Like none of the players are like much more like terrible than anyone else. It's like if you think about it, it's like the challenger ladder of like each region is the top 0.1% or 0.01%. Yeah. So they're going to be about as good individually. So if you're not playing well on that day as a team, then you may just not succeed. I think the only result that I would say was just stupid, in my opinion, was when G2 gave ANX all of their signature champs, and just like completely just threw the draft entirely. Like when they didn't ban Poppy, they didn't ban Anivia, they didn't ban Brand. Like if you don't ban those three champs against that team, it's gonna be a bad time. And like even after the fact, when we realized we maybe should have banned Poppy in our match, it was like we still banned Brand, we still banned Anivia because those two champs are like what they're known for. So I think it was just really greedy to not ban what those challenger players. I mean, they are challenger players, like practice on a daily basis.
So even though the group stage itself ended up being a bust because you didn't get out, obviously there's a bright spot we can focus on, which you did beat Rocks Tigers. So what do you make of this game? How did you beat Rocks Tigers?
Well, they left open Aurelion Sol when it was open. Like,
does that blow your mind?
That blew my mind a ton. I mean, I guess technically it was disabled, and then like they didn't have any information as to if we like still practiced it or anything. But like that's just one of those things, that it's like the first game that Huhi's going to get Aurelion Sol, he's going to completely smash everyone, and then it's going to be banned the rest of the tournament. Like we knew that the entire time. If it wasn't going to be banned, he was going to get one free win, and then we were going to like never get it again. So that would just happen to be our free win.
Because that's one of those things that, like, that makes me wonder how good the research from the Koreans is. Like, don't they have a spy who can tell them, like, yeah, he's definitely going to play that, by the way? It's mad, right?
Yeah. And like even I think the second time we played against Rocks, they banned 3 mid laners to try to put Jay on like a non-comfort like champ, and they succeeded in that. Like they put him in a champ that he wasn't confident in like playing against.
Right, so in light of the fact that, I mean, it's hard to blame you too much for the ANX one because they did come complete out of nowhere and obviously played, you know, better than anyone could expect. How do you actually evaluate Worlds overall?
I think we didn't exceed expectations, which was pretty depressing. I think we could have been a lot more driven individually. Like I said, like I was explaining before, it was like the MSI, like that entire like era was, we were really driven by the community's like external criticism. But like when we got to the next stage, I guess, when we played in the other split, it just seemed like that same level of motivation's not there because there's no more external pressure, right? So we had to try to like find motivation between everyone, and like we didn't really find it until like the boot camp, and then we played Worlds, and it was okay, but it wasn't like, you know, like that killer drive to like I have to win everything, you know? So I would say we met expectations from the community, which was pretty sad because in the past, you know, we've always exceeded expectations, but we did end up getting third in the group as everyone expected, except for, you know, it wasn't G2 in second place, it was ANX in second place. So yeah. I think the only thing that we did that was like notable was just the Rocksigers win, where, you know, Jay got to play Aurelion Sol and just completely like smashed him.
So as has been a theme in this interview, even after you beat Rocks Tigers and you did pretty decently in the group and some people thought you were going to do even worse, you did all right, the storyline still pretty much is, of course, CLG, they've got to upgrade some players and they've got to get some new, you know, you can't keep the same lineup. What is your mentality going into the next season of League of Legends? Like, you want everything to just stay the same and we'll just build from that and everything will be great. What like, does none of that get to you? Do people not have, is there anything to that?
I usually like don't let any community criticism like get to me unless it's like somewhat valid, I guess. I read most of what people say. Okay. And I take it all in and kind of like consider it, but I would say most of it isn't too valid. Like we have posts on our CLG subreddit saying that instead of Huhi we should have Chawi, and that doesn't even make sense to me, right? They like somebody watched a Legends Rising video, yeah, and said this guy has a great work ethic and he's a sub player for mid lane. You guys should get him, and I'm like, holy shit. There's no way. But I mean, me personally, I want the roster to stay essentially like the same, but I want to just make sure that we're improving like constantly on a lot of things. I think it's shown that every single season that we've been here, we've done a really solid job. Like CLG has done a really solid job at like assessing what our issues were and looking on how to improve that like heavily for the next season. Okay.
So one of the bright spots for you has been that throughout the 2 splits that you were the coach, especially after MSI, I saw a lot of people giving you praise, like saying, oh, like for example, I mean, the famous example is in the spring split where they just automatically, like the winner was like, Dylan from Immortals must be the best coach. And I saw a lot of people who were in the know who were like, they might have had the best team, but like a lot of people were picking you, or I mean, some people even picked Loco because his team had all the rookies in it, you know. So yeah, people gave you a lot of praise, and they were like, you know, if you look at the team he had, he didn't just have a team that in theory you just stand behind and they just auto win, which people could listen, whether rightly or wrongly, people could make these claims about Immortals or TSM in the summer, you know, because they're so dominant. How do you evaluate the job that you've done yourself? Like, do you consider yourself a top Western coach?
I would definitely consider myself a top Western coach, without a doubt. Just based on like my mindset, like my work ethic, and like my ability to like improve from feedback. What I will say is I think that the community has a very like limited perspective, and that I don't really care too much about the praise that people give because they don't really know what you're doing. Like, it feels good to get praise. It feels good to be like told that you're a good coach, but nobody really knows, right? Like, nobody really knows if Dylan was actually a good coach, and then they see, you know, when they play Lucian top and all of that, and it's like, who knows if that was even Dylan's doing that? They're playing Lucian top. It's like it seems like it could have been Huhi's doing, right? But why would the coach be blamed for that call, right?
Sure.
It's like nobody's really sure of like what anyone's doing within the scene except for the people that are actually there, like doing everything. So I think it's pretty hard to call like for the community, but I do think that I do a really solid job for CLG, and I always like push myself to make sure that I have like an impact.
As an outsider, what do you make of TSM's performance at Worlds?
I thought it was pretty eye-opening. I was actually really surprised because I thought that TSM would go a lot further. But it seemed as though like everything collapsed toward the end. Like just to give you like the whole spiel about like what I feel about TSM, like the entire duration of the split was, I felt like they came into the split with the best mindset, the best process, the best like systems in place to like make sure that they're one step ahead of everyone constantly. So I felt all the way up until playoffs that they were always one step ahead, and then around playoffs time I felt like they had fallen off a good amount. Even though they like completely went to like win the whole thing, I felt like they were no longer one step ahead. I felt like they were on the same like playing ground as everyone else. So I'll definitely say I was impressed by their regular split run, but during Worlds, I could kind of foresee them falling apart a little bit based on like how they were playing.
Okay, and the one other team I want to ask your opinion on is H2K. What do you think of H2K at Worlds?
I thought that they actually surprised me a lot. They were a team that, in scrims, were constantly getting leads in the early game. I was surprised. It was like they were the second seed, right?
Yeah, they qualified just like you because the other team won the split. Yeah.
Okay, so they were the second seed, and we had scrimmed them in Korea probably like 10, 15 times. And we had like a decent scrim record against them, but I wouldn't say that any of those games we had like full control. It always felt like H2K had control, but they didn't know what to do past like minute 15. Like they completely just smashed everything in like the first 15 minutes, but we would always come back because we were like really like mentally resilient, and like we just kept on like pushing it at them. And eventually they would make the mistake and we would just win the game off of it. Like they probably threw like 3 of those scrims like on Baron. And then I think that really showed during their like early run, like the first week play. But during the second week, they actually like really stepped it up and like figured out how to close out games. I was really surprised that throughout the entire boot camp they were doing the same thing. They were just like getting early leads, they're through the game, and then you win the game. And then the same thing happened first week. Second week it didn't happen at all. So I feel like they were a really good team that could have beaten any team, but I feel that way about a lot of teams personally. But they just turned it on for last week.
Okay. So in your career, I mean, Doublelift could have stayed. You could have had him in the lineup still. As you've mentioned, there was actually a couple of occasions where Forgiven could have come over because obviously he's had his own tumultuous time in Europe, so he's always available after every split. So there are worlds in which Zikz is the coach of like a superstar ego type player, like a very good player, but famously like a troublesome player. And that's actually something where, if you notice, that's another. There's two ways that coaches can get a lot of credit from the public. Okay, one is you go your route. You take a bunch of people that aren't expected to do super well, and then you kind of like make them into a team. And then the old line is like they're more than the sum of their parts, and so that's why people credit you if you then win with them, right? The other way, if you notice, is you got to be the guy who like gets through to the troublesome guy. The one who turns the superstar so that he is just like unleashing his potential. He's not just wrecking the team as well. Now, in your career so far as the actual head coach, you haven't really, from the outside, had to deal with like the big ego guy or the superstar type player. What do you think? Would your style of coaching suit a player like that? Do you think you could do that? Would you prefer to just always have guys that you got now where it's more like they're easier to talk to or they're on board with the team concept? What's your take on that? Because maybe one day if you coach long enough, could happen, right?
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I would prefer that players are not of that type, but I don't think it would be impossible for me to deal with. Because I have experience dealing with Peter for, as long as I have. And I did find ways to make it so that we can use his time effectively and not be like, I could help him improve to the point that he's not like that. And that's what we have done in the past. So I feel like I could work with that kind of player, but I do not feel like I would want to, because that's not like the starting point that I want to have.
So you said earlier in the story, okay, that like Hotshot was the guy early on you connected with, you know, and he was receptive to you, but for whatever reason, other players in the team, other coaches coming in, you never kind of got your shot early on. Now, the amazing thing about the way esports works is for those first, like 3.5 seasons of LCS, CLG were failures. They used to never get to the deep in the playoffs except like one time, an okay run. And then the key thing is they never won any titles. So while they're sitting around winning nothing, Cloud9's winning 2 titles, TSM's stacking up titles. But because CLG won 2 splits in a row, I mean, as an org, they've kind of caught up pretty quickly, actually. Like, they're back in the game again. They're one of the better orgs. So when you add in your split where they got rid of Doublelift, or obviously Hotshot probably thought in his mind, I always have to have this guy here somehow, like my success is going to be tied to him. So when you win without Doublelift, and then you have this great result at MSI, like one of the best NA results, Hotshot must feel like, you must be like his adopted son at this point in time, right? He must just think like you've made all his dreams come true, like you've turned his whole org around. What's the relationship like with Hotshot?
It's pretty good. It's pretty good for sure. He just mostly is hands off like these days, because he just trusts me to make the right decisions.
Okay. Right. To finish the interview, I want to put your skills to the test, okay? I want to really see it, just to see what can happen in the future, okay? So what I want you to do is you have to pick a player in one of the LCS teams who at the moment isn't maybe like super good or isn't a star player yet. Is there anyone where you would kind of have your eye on this guy? Like, this guy one day I think is going to be super good, or I've noticed something special about him. Can you pick out a player in LCS that we could narrow down to? Who's caught your eye?
All of the players that have caught my eye have already turned out to be good. Like, my instant instinct would have been Xmithie, but he's already shown at Worlds that he's really good.
Sure.
So I don't really have an answer right now outside of Xmithie. I'd have to think about it more.
Okay. To finish the interview then, do you have a final message, someone you want to thank, say hello to?
Yeah, just thanks to everybody for supporting CLG, for supporting me during this incredibly long journey so far. We've got good things coming. We're always looking to improve, so it should be a good next split. And if I said bad things that I shouldn't have said, sorry for that. But other than that, yeah, thanks for having me, Thorin.
Hey, this is Travis Gafford, the Doublelift expert, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.